Maximum Ride. Those two words might just unlock very deep core memories inside you, and for good reason. Maximum Ride is, or was, a best-selling book series by a best-selling author about a flock of winged kids escaping from evil scientists and wolfy shapeshifters. It was a smash hit that spawned manga, comics, and even a movie that has this bizarrely famous name attached, where if you don't know about the Maximum Ride movie and who is involved in that, I mean, you'd never be able to guess. A lot of people remember Maximum Ride fondly, or remembered in some way, but memories start to get, I think, very foggy about the later books. Because Maximum Ride is one of those series that people loved as kids, but then became famous for other reasons. In hindsight, there were a lot of details that didn't add up, and plenty of warning signs of what was to come. I mean, what was meant to be 3 books turned into 8 books. And that downward curve that they were on just soon turned into this nose-tail, like, just dive to the bottom. And then one of the strangest, most shocking endings that, again, you would not be able to believe that that is how the series ends. I was a fan of Maximum Ride for many, many years. I remember picking it up in elementary school because even then angels were my special interest, and the first book is called The Angel Experiment. So obviously, I picked it up, I was instantly in love. I read along with almost every release, but I hit my breaking point most of the way through. And I just read one of the books and I was like, I'm not gonna pick up any more of this, I am done, I cannot anymore with Maximum Ride. And so I just sort of gave up there and accepted it, but it's always lingered in my head. It really was extremely formative to me as a kid, as a teen. I think it influenced some of my writing style, definitely when I first started writing. And certainly I know I had a lot of stories when I was a kid that I would make up about, like, a bunch of cool mutant kids. And I mean, that's just all Maximum Ride. That's the Maximum Ride impact, is all of those old OCs that we had about, you know, tortured lab experiments. That was Max Ride. So, yeah, I was thinking about it again, and I thought, man, I know how it ends from spoilers, but I wonder how it ends. I wonder if I should reread the whole thing. And so I did. I decided to reread the entire series, start to finish, including the ending that I'd never actually read before. And that is what this video is going to be. That's what it's going to be. That's it. I'm going to explain and discuss every book and every plot twist as we go, and just follow the madness of Maximum Ride until the end. This is, with all of my videos, not something you're supposed to be reading Maximum Ride along to. I'm going to explain Maximum Ride whether or not you have any interest in reading it, and frankly, mild spoilers, I wouldn't recommend most people read Maximum Ride. So yes, full books, everything until the end, with a few intermissions to spice things up. I mean, apologies, I've been away and haven't posted lately. I've been doing this. So let's just, like, get going and see how long it takes. I'm thinking like 5 hours. Let's see. But first, a very small prelude to kick us off. I want to talk about James Patterson, the author. Knowing him is a pretty helpful groundwork for the series of Maximum Ride, and a surprising amount of people don't actually know that he's responsible for it. I've definitely spoken to people who are very familiar with Maximum Ride in some way, but just never fully realized that the James Patterson was the author of it. So James Patterson is one of the highest paid and most prolific authors in the world, like, full stop. In some estimates, he's certainly been the highest paid author for multiple years in a row. He is extremely successful for somebody who in some ways has sort of escaped the mainstream. I would say that we're way more familiar with other authors like Stephen King than we are with James Patterson as, like, a public figure. He certainly doesn't have as many, like, movie adaptations, but he is making bank. So he's written a ridiculous amount of books, well over 100, many of which are just top sellers. He mostly makes top-selling books. His primary genres are thriller and crime, but after the success of Maximum Ride, he started dipping more into YA and middle grade, and at this point, he's written everything from, like, children's books to, you know, full-on adult spy thrillers. Patterson also collaborates a lot with other authors. Most of his books are collaborations in some way, it appears. Like, he's also collaborated with famous people. For example, he wrote a book with Bill Clinton once. you know, okay. Patterson publishes so much that I doubted for a very long time he was a physical man rather than a pseudonym. Like, I fully believe that if you looked him up, there would be no known photos of him because he didn't exist. And there are photos of him, so he does seem to exist. Maybe. It definitely, though, remains a fact that his frequent use of collaborators is usually left off of the cover or even the inside pages of his books. Most of his books just say James Patterson on them, but when you look into it, huge amounts of, like, all of his series and books are usually done with at least somebody else. Maximum Ride was pretty much entirely written with a woman named Gabrielle, Charbonnet? Oh gosh, I just realized I don't know how to pronounce her last name. Well, she doesn't get any credit on any of the books. She's thanked in the first couple pages of all of the Maximum Ride books, but she's sort of just thanked as like, thank you, Gabrielle, for always flying high and cracking wise. I believe that's the line he uses every time. It's not actually explicit, but she is the co-author of Maximum Ride. She wrote definitely a lot of the series. It's also very likely that Patterson has used ghostwriters before. Ghostwriters being people who write books according to a rough outline provided by someone else. We can't necessarily prove it or allege it, but it is pretty obvious that he has made plenty of use of ghostwriters, okay? So Maximum Ride itself is a sort of redux of two other books Patterson previously written, which is The Lake House and When the Wind Blows. Both follow winged escaped lab experiments called Max, but the parallels just end there. He wrote them for adults, and then he sort of realized that a version for younger audience might work better. So Maximum Ride is a soft redux, but it has absolutely nothing to do with The Lake House, and I'm not gonna bring them up anymore. They're absolutely irrelevant. They just have a couple parallels because he thought, I bet kids would like winged mutants, and he was right. So what all of this information about Patterson tells us is sort of the foundation for the series to come. James Patterson, an author made of success, wrote a very successful kids book series. It was meant to be a trilogy, and it just kept going. So, first, finally, sort of, book one. Before we get into the first book, I want to first note that there are some content warnings for this video. They will be in the description as well as on a graphic displayed now. Maximum Ride is a series originally written for tweens to teens, but that doesn't mean that, like a lot of things that I've covered, it doesn't cross into some pretty strange and even disturbing territory, so there's actually quite a number of things that you should be aware of before you continue on and make judgment calls on if you feel it is appropriate. I am not going into exceedingly graphic detail about some of these things, but I have to mention that they're going to come up because Maximum Ride goes to some pretty crazy and actually surprisingly dark territory right from the start and definitely later on. So please take a moment and check in that you're good with that. Thank you. It's very easy to understand why Maximum Ride was a best-selling book and just kind of kept going as long as it did. It's good. I mean, it's not incredible or like a breakthrough revolutionary piece of text, but it's fast, it's light, it's fun, it's perfect for its kind of middle grade to YA audience, and rereading it as an adult was just as breezy. The character voice of Max is strong, commenting on everything with some like quip or sass that it delighted me so much as a kid. It's first person for her, but third for others, full of short sentences and not much description. It just starts and it just keeps going right after another. Often, Max will talk directly to the reader, the book itself opening with a warning that reading ahead will make you, too, part of the experiment. There's definitely a lot of odd, dated details and language, but overall, it's snappy, it's easy. I'm not going to have too many quotes total, but to help set the feeling of the book, here's an early bit of the action scene of just how it reads, okay? After that, it was like a movie, a bunch of superimposed images that hardly seemed real. I landed another blow, then an eraser punched me so hard that my head snapped around and I felt a burst of blood in my mouth. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Fang holding his own against an eraser, until two more ganged up on him and he went down under flailing, clawed hands. from chapter 5 of the first book. So, yeah, it's fast, it's easy, it's a little bit like the kind of quippy writing that you associate now with not very good Marvel movies, but, you know, it is what it is. Book 1 is quite solid, but there are still warning signs. Especially with foreknowledge of what's happening, there are countless dropped plot threads already. The structure is quick and reliant on cliffhangers. It keeps you reading, but pretty soon you learn half of the cliffhangers are bait and switch. There's constant freakouts that by the next page are just nothing. The rest of the chapters are no better about the bait and switch either, as really that is Maximum Ride's tagline. It will continuously and somehow increasingly become a series where every page there is a twist or reveal that is either forgotten or fake. Sometimes the same concept being the subject of more than one twist, switching back and forth until you don't really remember or care what is real. For the first book, for book 1, this lack of plot fidelity is only being hinted at. People who read it will probably anticipate a great build-up, like cohesion to the madness, and those people will be disappointed. Eventually. But the thing about Max Ride is that it does just kind of work. You do get just kind of to keep reading, and you start thinking it's gonna go somewhere. Only with age and hindsight is the ghostwriting, you know, clear on the wall, and the plot is just so obviously loose spaghetti. But let's just start with the plot. Maximum Ride is about a group of 6 mutant bird children trying to evade capture from the evil lab that made them. Initially, they begin in the Colorado wilderness in a huge house fending for themselves. A scientist from the laboratory, which is known as the school, rescued them and took them out here. His name was Jeb, and he stopped appearing about 2 years ago with new supplies, so they all assume he's dead. Maximum Ride, who is 14, is now the caretaker for the group. She's the oldest by only a few months, though they don't truly know how old they are. But she has a deep protective and self-sacrificing freak, as she kind of like self-sacrificing streak. Maybe she's a bit of a freak about it later by the very end. But yeah, she's trying to just protect her flock. The others are Fang, who is this quiet and moody 14-year-old, Iggy, who is sarcastic and blind and also 14, Nudge, she is chatty and emotional and 11, the Gas Man, the mischievous but kind of innocent-hearted 8-year-old, and Angel, the cute but very mysterious 6-year-old. They're all a family and a unit, just sort of as the flock, having been experimented on by the school and tortured with medical mutations for their entire lives. Mostly they grew up in dog cages. Angel and Gazzy, or the Gas Man, because his farts. I mean, yeah, I guess that if an 8-year-old boy was pressed to name himself, he probably would name himself the Gas Man because he farts, but I mean, I guess that's realistic. Anyways, Angel and Gazzy, as he's usually called, are blood siblings, but everyone else is unrelated. Fang and Match also have a bit of a romance thing. This can be kind of weird if you look at it in the family way where they did grow up in a lab together, but I actually don't think it's that bad or crosses a line because they are much more of a found family dynamic, and Max and Fang together act as the leaders and almost the parents of the younger kids. Especially after Jeb left, they sort of took on these roles, and I give their romance a pass, personally. So, the flock are mutants. They have huge wings, hollow bones, air sacs, different blood. They are 2% bird, and the oldest known living experiments from the school, which seems to be creating a wide variety of mutants for unclear reasons. The only other successful kind of mutant are the Erasers, who are the generic baddies of the series. They are basically werewolf shapeshifters, but they're grown in batches, and they look like fully grown movie star adults in like a year, and then they die around the age of 5. They mostly just sort of come in to be, you know, video game NPCs. They just beat up a lot of them, but there's always more. Max and the flock are having a normal time in their safe house when suddenly Erasers show up and abduct Angel. Among the Erasers is one named Ari. Ari is Jeb's son and he's 7. But unlike the totally artificial Erasers, Ari was a normal child when Max last saw him and now has been mutated. He is now a man-sized shape-shifting killer, but he's also still 7. And boy, is he going to be a tragic character, if you can't already tell. Max, Fang, and Nudge set out to rescue Angel, leaving Iggy and Gazzy behind to watch the house. The school is in Death Valley, and they have no plan, but they know that they need to save Angel. As they're traveling, Max spots with her kind of raptor vision a girl being bullied in the streets. It's worth noting right now, all these kids have powers beyond just flying. Right now, it is mostly flying, but pretty much every book, they're going to be gaining a random power. The majority of the time, it's only used once and then forgotten about. Sometimes just entirely retconned from existing. Starting out, all the kids can fly and they have super sight, plus they're extremely tall and powerful. However, Angel can read minds, and Gazzy is a perfect mimic. Anyways, Max spots a random girl being bullied and separates from the group to intervene. The girl is named Ella, she is 13, and she's being harassed by some kids, including one who somehow has a gun. Max helps Ella, but is chased by the bullies through the woods, getting shot and ultimately taking a bullet in her wing and back. Seeing no other alternatives, she finds Ella's house and risks revealing herself. Ella's mom, Dr. Martinez, turns out to be a vet, fittingly enough. Dr. Martinez and Ella rock, by the way, by the simple fact that they are just kind. Maximum Ride is very narrative, inner thoughts focused kind of book. It's full of sarcasm and one-liners, and also panic. Like, the trauma that Max feels at trusting others and around medicine feels suffocating. It feels, honestly, pretty well written, and then these random strangers become her first real encounter of trustworthy, kind people. And it's really nice sometimes to read about someone who's been very hurt being cared for the first time. That's a really good trope. Dr. Martinez doesn't call the cops or act shocked by Max's wing. She just sort of buckles down and helps her. When taking Max to her clinic to get some x-rays done, she's protective and she's smart, and I'm sorry, but I just always really loved Dr. Martinez even as a kid. Like, it's kind of fun to read about all of these horrors of these mutant kids with their cool powers, but I always really just wanted them to be safe and okay. And especially as an adult now, I'm sitting there like, oh my god, these are kids. These are little kids. They're like kids and teens, and they just need someone to take care of them for once, but that's never going to happen. Like, spoilers. They will never be safe, happy, and okay. That's where we are. That's what this book series is like. So, Dr. Martinez finds that Max has a small microchip implanted into her hand, but it was inserted at such a young age that Dr. Martinez doesn't think it can be safely removed. Max heals very quickly from her wounds and after 2 days departs, but we will see these two characters more later in the series. Meanwhile, Fang and Nudge are hiding in a canyon among hawks. Fang studies how they fly and communicate, while Nudge worries if Max is dead. Nudge also knows that she once saw her name and address in this old school file, and that address is nearby. Nudge, more than any of the flock, just wants a normal life, so she flies off to try and find her mom. She finds a woman she's not sure if she looks like, kind of disappointed that this woman looks plain and is smoking, but then erasers attack. The erasers attack like every other chapter sometimes, so if it's unclear, if I kind of skip a bit of the story, if there seems like there's ever a little gap, you can always add more eraser attacks. They fill every empty space in the story. Nudge and Fang are then taunted with the message that they are the only two members of the flock still alive. Oh no! Meanwhile at the house, Gazzy and Iggy are upset about being left behind and conspire to protect themselves with traps and bombs. They set up for an oil slick, like for a truck, and they send it crashing, but that only attracts more attention. Attacked by even more erasers, they set off a huge explosion and flee to go join the others. So the flock then is able to regroup, now near the hawks, and sets out to find Angel. Fang, Max, and Nudge are soon captured, though, and brought to the school. Angel has been experimented on, meanwhile, hearing the thoughts of sadistic scientists who want to dissect her, and also hearing the thoughts of mutant children doomed to die in cages and barely able to form full thoughts. It's really grim. There's a lot of detail, honestly, of these scientists who just love torturing the 6-year-old girl. It feels a bit excessive at times. Like, the scientists are so comically evil in this universe that they don't have any clear motivations or goals. They seem to just be sadists. And they are specifically, constantly attacking and threatening people who just look like little children, so it feels even more crazy. So, pretty quickly though, now that half of the flock has been captured, Max learns the first big plot twist. Jeb is alive! Yeah. She's long thought of him as dead, as the only good adult who protected them, but nope, he's fine and he's working at the school. He just stopped showing up 2 years ago. They thought he was dead and buried him. Well, you know, fake buried him. He's fine, he's just been at his job, being mysterious. So Jeb informs Max that all of this is an experiment and that she needs to play along. That she was made specifically with a purpose, to save the world. This is a fact every other book in the series will repeat, but it's in truth meaningless, but we'll get there later. She has to save the world. The flock, sans Iggy and Gazzy, are brought to the outdoor training yard where erasers are trained to hunt and tear apart live prey. They're in cages, but it's still pretty dumb to bring the bird kids outside, and it's unclear why they were brought here, as they pretty quickly escape. But like, what was the lab going to do? The flock are their most important, most successful experiments. There was no way that they were going to let the erasers just tear them up. But then if you question that, you start to realize how flimsy the school is in general. Again, there's no sense of realism to how it functions. I know that sounds like a ridiculous thing, but I have to suspend my disbelief so much in Maximum Ride anyways, that I can't help but start to wonder about the school and how it functions. It's just an evil factory. They make hundreds of eraser babies, but they can't recreate 6 long-lived winged kids. They constantly improve the erasers, but the flock is just always better and also unable to ever be replicated. They're deeply inconsistent with their creations. I mean, some of them are perfect hybrids, while others are Akira-style living blobs. What are they trying to do? What are they honestly trying to test and create? We can't really ask that question because there is no answer. Iggy and Gazzy descend from the sky with the hawks to flee the flock, and they all escape. We're halfway through the book at this point, but it feels entirely like it was meant to end here. This is a very segmented end of part 1 sort of situation, but it feels like an entirely different book. And the books in general, especially at first, are very episodic. So, I mean, I'm used to it, but when you look at it as a book as a whole, it is just so cleanly 2 separate books that have been just jammed together. So the flock now is flying away east, but Max is struck by a sudden headache and collapses. Angel reveals that she's read some of the white coat scientists' minds and that there's an institute in New York that might have more answers, but she isn't sure the name of the institute. She has also learned that the flock were born from human mothers, not test tubes like they presumed, and she's also learned a bit about their various parents. For Max, though, she just has no information. They fly to New York to look for answers, having nothing to guide them but the vague name of the Institute of Living. Max has several more headaches, which seem to be more like seizures, and begins to see images and words in her mind. While sleeping in a homeless city in the sewers, a kid with a laptop approaches them complaining about interference, as his laptop is glitching out. The screen has the same images that keep flashing in Max's brain, and then a message to her appears. Then, the voice shows up. And this is really the turning point for weirdness. The voice as a character, as a concept, is pure MacGuffin. It's purely there to raise questions and be mysterious. Multiple characters are the voice in Max's head throughout the series, at least until that's retconned, maybe. There's multiple voices too, but not really, only for Max. The voice, when it first shows up, is especially mysterious. It's almost supernatural. Like, mind-reading, mimicry, bird wings, they're all impossible, obviously, but they feel somewhat like biological fantasy. You can kind of buy them as mutations-ish. It's fine, you can suspend your disbelief. But Max's voice projecting images to a computer feels a lot less like a random mutation, or the other stuff it does. The voice is just that. It is a genderless voice that speaks directly with Max, generally being mysterious about her destiny and what she should do next. It gives hints when it's needed, and it's silent when it isn't. It guides Max to FAO Schwartz, which is the old New York toy store, where she witnesses a Ouija board moving on its own to tell her to save the world. This is something I am very certain, I mean, I wrote most of these reviews as I was going before I read the other books. It's never explained, it's just a one-off spook. It's hardly the only one, but I was surprised with just the ridiculousness of Max's magic voice controlling a planchette. So, yeah, they've been brought here by a mysterious voice in her head for unclear reasons, and that is going to be sort of the feeling of the plot's direction for most of the series. It just sort of happens. Angel sees a stuffed bear that she likes, and she uses her mind powers to force an old woman to buy it for her. So add that power to the list. She can now control people's minds. Not much later, Max gets a vibe and looks down, finding a credit card with her name on it. Angel gets her own mysterious vibe, but the password is Mother. The flock uses it to treat themselves to extremely tacky 2000s makeovers and food as they hunt for the Institute. Where this card came from, why the password is Mother, that's not ever going to be addressed or explained. Oh, and also, erasers keep attacking? You have to remember that that's a constant fact. Ari at this point has fake died at least twice by now, and that's also going to be a running theme. After drawing attention by ordering too much food at a fancy restaurant, they flee by flying away in public and hide out on the beach for a while. Angel discovers that she can breathe underwater. Angel is, by the way, going to by far get the most powers. Fang is deeply injured by yet another eraser attack, and Max kisses him, starting one of the most drawn-out romance arcs ever. The flock finally stumbles around enough that, with the aid of the voice, they find the Institute of Living, and realize that there's a secret sewer basement. They break in, and Nudge gains the ability to touch objects and sense their history, allowing her to provide a computer password. They print off a bunch of files that seem to be about them and their parents, but then Gazzy discovers there's also some cages down here with mutant kids and animals. I'd like to read one of these sections. The two little creatures asleep on their cage floor were clearly horrible failures, and probably couldn't last much longer, what with some of their vital organs on the outside of their bodies and all. Kidneys, bowels, a heart. Oh, the poor babies. I turned to see him looking at a large cat, like a serval or a margay. I'd never seen a real animal in one of the labs before. Just as I was wondering what its deal was, it woke up, blinked sleepily, then turned over and dozed again. I swallowed really, really hard. It had human eyes, and when I examined its paws more closely, I saw human-like fingers beneath the retractable claws. Chapter 128. Also, there's way more than 100 chapters in most of these books. I didn't expect Maximum Ride to be what influenced my appreciation for body horror. But geez, that image of that cat probably has stayed with me very significantly. Ooh. The flock rescues the mutants and runs away, parting ways with the group as one mutant takes charge. We'll never hear about them again. Angel, however, keeps a small Scotty dog they also found, whose name is Total. As they flee again, they run back into the erasers. Max even comments at one point that the erasers have an uncanny ability to always find them, but then also sometimes not find them for days. It doesn't make much sense and it never will. Ari and Jeb are also somehow always there too. Even though the flock can cover incredible ground if they're flying, Ari and Jeb are just always with the erasers wherever they're needed. Max and Ari fight again, Ari revealing at this point that while Jeb was looking after the flock for several years, he abandoned Ari, who was jealous that Jeb loved them more. Ari was only 3 when Jeb took the flock and started caring for them, and so he was 3 when the school mutated him into an eraser. It's dark stuff. Max then snaps his neck by accident and he dies. This isn't the first murder in the book. Gazzy and Iggy literally exploded several erasers, but it's pretty crazy to read about a teen murdering a kid, even if that kid is an adult-looking mutant werewolf. Eri, though, is fine. I mean, the guy who's fake out died more than once already in the book, and he's revealed as backup and Adam, like, immediately in book 2, like, first chapter, Ari's back. Still, Jeb hunches over Ari's lifeless body and shouts at Max for killing her brother, which, yes, there are some parent reveals and false twists throughout, but Jeb is Max's actual father and Ari is her half-brother. To just, like, lay that out right now, that is going to be consistently true, even though there will be some fake-outs later. The flock then escapes to head to Washington, D.C., where their files say their parents might be, and the book ends. And that is the first book of the series, The Angel Experiment. I need it to be said that it is hot as balls out. And so every time there's any sort of pause in the video, I mean, I try to do each section in one take, obviously. Anytime, though, in between those sections, I am just standing in front of a fan for like 5 minutes. Oh gosh. Okay. Book 2, let's go into this. It's so hot. Okay. Hitting the second book, I really remember how much I enjoyed this series. Like, I loved it. My friends and I would share copies, and I would underline my favorite jokes and add annotations and, like, little drawings. We were always buying the latest on release day. I remember exactly where I was in Barnes & Noble when I first read the 4th book, and the shine began to really fade. But we're on book 2, which was always my favorite book in the series. So Maximum Ride is fun, but the second book is still part of the growing descent into literal, literary insanity that is the series, so the plot points begin to get sillier and sillier, as even more plot threads are entirely dropped. I would love to keep a count, actually, of things that are brought up with no explanation, but it'd be really difficult. Some things do come back, most things do not come back. The pace is lightning quick and happily episodic as before. It's sort of a silly odyssey of nonsense of a couple surprisingly good elements. As much as I hate the bait and switch narrative and the way unexplained events are the primary way that the plot moves, I really enjoyed the flock and the book on a whole. I don't like the kind of overly sarcastic lead voice in adult fiction, but as a teen, Max's sass is surprisingly enjoyable. There are jokes that I liked, and the way that the characters act is quite in line for a bunch of messy mutant children. I wanted the best for them, and I felt both, like, then and now, real emotions for their plights. Like, just golly gee, okay? So, fleeing to the DC area to look for their parents from mysterious printouts that they stole from the Institute, the flock soon bumps into more erasers, but this time, the erasers have wings. They're sloppily grafted and don't work well, leading the flock to easily beating them. But Ari still manages to hit Fang with a severe wound. The flock is forced then to go to a hospital for help. There, the FBI quickly shows up. They are mutant bird kids in a medical place. It's deeply suspicious. The FBI tries to say that they have interest in these reports of these illegally made experiments, but the flock just doesn't trust them. Then one agent, Anne, shows up. Immediately, she's really likable, even to the very wary and paranoid Max. So here's her first scene, because it also really shows the style and tone of the writing again. And, I kinda like the scene. "My name is Anne Walker," she said. "And yes, I'm one of them. I'm the one they call in when everything goes kablooey." "Have things gone kablooey?" I asked politely. She gave a short laugh. Yeah," she said in a duh tone of voice. "When we get a call from a hospital saying they've got at least 2 and possibly 6 previously unknown recombinant DNA life forms, and one of them is gravely injured, then yes, I think we can safely say that things have gone kablooey with a capital K." "Oh," I said. "Gee, we sound important." One side of her mouth twitched. "Uh-huh. Why the surprise? Hasn't anyone ever told you you're important?" Jeb. The one word shocked my sense, and I went into a total shutdown so I wouldn't start bawling like a goofy recombinant life form that I am. Jeb had made me feel important once upon a time. He'd made me feel smart, strong, capable, special, important, you name it. Lately, though, he mostly made me feel blinding rage and a stomach-clenching sense of betrayal. Chapter 15. So, Anne makes a deal with Max to hide the flock at her home while Fang heals, and generally just lay low there. Anne would like to study them, non-invasively, and protect them. Max doesn't trust her, and the flock is generally anxious, but they wind up agreeing. Anne takes them to her huge mansion on the outskirts of DC, and it's peaceful. It's normal. Max especially can't stand this, but the younger kids start to love it. They have separate bedrooms, hot showers, lots of land and farm animals to play with, a pond to swim in, like it's paradise. And I always really liked the section of these books where the flocks get to just be kids and be taken care of. Again, I feel really bad for them. They're just some kids. We really need to get social services involved. So Anne starts to learn to cook and feeds them huge family meals, taking care of them by being both stern and kind. I mean, Max hates how she's sort of taking her place as the mom of the group, but as it's pointed out, Max is only 14. She shouldn't have to be the mom of the flock at all. She just has wound up in the position because of her really bad life. Also, Total the dog that Angel stole from the lab can talk now. It's weird how it happens. There's a fake out where at first it appears that Gazzy is using ventriloquism to make it look like Total is talking, and the book treats this as a funny joke. A talking dog. Wow. But a few chapters later, nope, Total really can talk. Total has never been my favorite character, acting as a sort of grouchy New Yorker comic relief. But honestly, this reveal did make me laugh. It got me. So Max thinks that she hears Total speak, and then this happens. I felt stupid, but can Total, talk? Uh-huh, Angel said casually, squeezing water out of her hair. I stared at her. He talks. Total talks, and you didn't tell me? Well, Angel looked for him, saw that he was pretty far away, and lowered her voice. Don't tell him I said this, but he's not actually that interesting. Max then goes to talk to Total. Total? I said when I was close. Can you talk? He flopped on the grass, panting slightly. Yeah, so? Jeez, I mean, mutant weirdos are nothing new to me, you know? But a talking dog? Why didn't you mention this before? I asked him. It's not like I lied about it, said Total, reaching up with a hind leg to scratch behind one ear. Between you and me, I'm still trying to get used to the whole flying kid thing. Chapter 31. So great. I enjoy that goof. I think that's a pretty good goof, and I was in general surprised at how many of the jokes in this book actually still played to me. This book is from 2006, and there's plenty of things that do not land, but a lot do. The flock often sounds like real kids and tweens, and they carry like a strong joke or their weird inside jokes. They move between horrible angst and teasing quite naturally. Also, I read these at a very formative age, and I bet they've influenced my sense of humor along the way. The Halcyon days with Anne are still dotted with nonsense plot elements and twists, of course. Fang starts a blog, which is one of the most important plot points in the entire series. Fang starts a blog. Remember this. Max begins to look in the mirror and sees herself as an eraser, a hallucination that, of course, I mean, say it with me, leads to nothing and means nothing. Woohoo! Eri being back from the dead is not addressed particularly either. The flock spends a while looking into the files they stole from the Institute, but can't solve what they mean. Yet there's still random fake-outs along the way. Using what is seen to later be the wrong code, they still find a photo of a baby Gazzy hidden in a condemned building. Inconsistencies, like Nud seemingly having a parent in the last book but having different parents in DC this time, are also left unexplained. The voice continues to lurk in Max's head, but it only exists as a plot MacGuffin, kind of sarcastically giving her vague advice about having to save the world and doing nothing else. As much as action is constant in these books, the actual feeling of the plot is very stagnant. Like, nothing actually changes. Anne then sends the flock to a regular school, because why not? Plenty of times the series is so episodic that the flock does something only for the hijinks appeal, and that's sort of what this school section is. Everyone struggles to fit in, but the younger kids really wind up liking it, having never had a chance to just socialize with kids their age, or feel normal. Even Max is surprised by the experience. She agrees to go out on a date with a normal guy. They spend a few months having a normal life, and it's a relief. I'm really happy for them. They're finding no new information on parents or saving the world, but they are just being kids for once. Some erasers attack, because that legally has to happen a certain number of times each book, but they're fine. They even go on a class trip to DC. Nudge touches the Vietnam Memorial and gets overwhelmed with Object's memory, while Angel uses her mind control to meet the president and even get him to move $1 billion from the military to education and homeless care. Max worries about Angel's sense of ethics, but honestly, hell yeah, Angel, get it done. Go girl. Every so often in this book, we also get Ari's POV. Ari in the first book was a tragic character, but he was written very oddly, acting way more like an adult than a traumatized 7-year-old. He was actually at points slightly creepy towards Max, at one point calling her feisty and beautiful. He's still kind of odd to Max, but he's been entirely retconned and reframed personality-wise, so he's obsessed with her, but now it is firmly this childlike obsession, which is way better. He was 3 when his dad abandoned him to raise Max and the flock, and yeah, that was pretty rough. Prior to that, he always looked up to Max. He kind of saw her as a big sister, while she wasn't paying attention to him because she was busy being a lab experiment. It's a sad little story they have. So his fixation then on Max makes sense. The one constant he really has is his father choosing Max over him. He wants to kill Max, but increasingly he also wants to kidnap her and keep her for himself to be his friend. The book 1 angle makes it feel a little bit creepy, but if you start to think of it more, and again as you should, that he's just a child, mutated horribly and forced into a bloody conflict, then him just wanting to be friends with Max again and be wanted and not lonely becomes properly tragic, and Ari is just tragic. I wish that he was written better, though. He's a child soldier who thinks he's all grown up and just wants to be loved. At one point in this book, a child thinks that he's Wolverine, because he just always looks kind of, I guess, half wolfy and close enough, and the child asks for an autograph, and it's the first time, it specifically says in the book, the first time Ari has ever felt wanted. My poor boy. Also, Ari has a voice of his own. It's not going to be explained or brought up again, so don't worry. While the flock's time at school is going well, they happen to see on TV a woman who looks like Iggy discussing her son who went missing 14 years ago. Looking into it, they think it probably is his mom and take him to his parents. His parents feel certain that he's their son, and a birthmark even proves it, so Iggy leaves the flock to go be with his actual parents. However, he's back a few chapters later. This is both kind of a tragic thing, but it's inevitable, because Maximum Ride is this world of arrested development. Iggy's parents seem to be the real deal. They accepted he was theirs, and he was now blind even, but when they found out about his wings, they wanted to take it public, put it on TV and interviews, and sell his story. He couldn't take being a freak show and left, and that's really all we ever get of the story. But it's sad because it probably wasn't a trick by the school or anything. Iggy really did meet his parents, and it just wasn't what he wanted, so he had to flee. And that's it, and that's really the inevitable note for all of the flock. They're too used to the chaos of hiding and the reality of being mutants to truly accept anything else in their lives. At school, meanwhile, Gaz and Iggy have stumbled upon a secret basement full of files. They overhear the principal making vague threats about secret files that have to be burned, and they discover a mysterious tunnel. Looking into it, it turns out their school was not built decades ago, but is actually only 2 years old, having once been a mental health hospital. What this means, why it matters, and what anyone is meant to take away from this is unknown. Max stumbles into a teacher's lounge and sees 3 of them with tasers, prompting the flock to go fight and flee from the school and Anne's house. What exactly was going on here is never explained. As they go to pick Total up from Anne's, they see Jeb and the Erasers descend upon the place. Anne is arguing very crossly with Jeb, but as Max lands to intervene, she realizes they know each other. Jeb reveals that Anne is his boss. Anne says she has grown attached to the flock as family, having even floated adoption just a couple days earlier, but Max is betrayed and self-satisfied that her paranoia was true, and the flock flees. Like the book before it, book 2 is strangely bifurcated. It feels like the school arc is one thing, and now the second half is a much less cohesive something else. Among the erasers, Max has been spotting a girl identical to her more than once. Max 2. Because yes, identical clones will be a running theme in this series. We even have Max 2's perspective and her intense hatred and jealousy of Max. The flock heads to Florida, following the whim of Angel. Angel also reveals, quite late, that apparently at the school she overheard how the flock was made as mutants to survive a coming apocalypse, one that is going to be caused by a company called ITEX. Looking into it, they realize ITEX is a huge conglomerate that seemingly owns and creates everything. They just haven't been paying attention. On the way to Florida, also, Angel realizes she can talk to fish. She could read Animal Thoughts' last book, so this isn't new, but hey, jot that one down onto the list, I guess. They find the headquarters of ITEX is conveniently very nearby and get ready to infiltrate it. Not having a plan at this point, or any goal, they're just like, well, let's go. They barely know what they're doing or why, which makes the plot feel listless. At a motel, Max is kidnapped and swapped out with Max 2 without anybody noticing. Max is put into a sensory deprivation tank, and Jeb pulls her out to explain that ITEX wants to terminate and replace her with Max 2 because Max is a lost cause. Yes, to note, evidently the flock was made to save the world or outlive the apocalypse by the school, who is making them for ITEX, their parent company, but also because ITEX was likely to cause the apocalypse. It's slightly confusing how this information is framed and how the school and ITEX are related to each other. Like, if they were made to stop ITEX or as ITEX backup plan, and the answer is sort of both. Max 2 fails to act like Max at all as she leads the flock to the ITEX headquarters. She's following her own orders to get them all captured and killed. The flock doesn't appear to notice anything is wrong, but it is so obvious that Max 2 is not Max. They raid the lab and they find information specifically on Nudge's parents, which reveal they were killed after she was stolen from them. So that's great for you, Nudge. The alarms begin to blare, and Angel reveals that they always knew Max 2 was fake because, among other things, Angel is a mind reader. Meanwhile, Max is broken out of her tank and makes her way to ITEX, somehow able to follow the flock by scent. It's never mentioned again. She busts in and fights her clone, but ultimately doesn't kill Max 2, declaring to Jeb and the Whitecoats that Max 2 is her own person, and Max won't be controlled by them into killing a fellow victim. Gazzy sets off a bomb and they fly away, which ends the book. While I'm sitting here reflecting on the second book's plot, I do want to note something, and this is something very interesting that never occurred to me before. And also, I'm extremely hot because we don't have air conditioning in England, so if I look very hot and sweaty, it's because I am, and somebody's at the door. Anyways, I want to note something, and that is a question. And that question is, do you think that Total is human? This never crossed my mind as a child, but the lab that he was taken from seemed to all be human children experiments, as in general all school experiments have been human children. Like, it's said that there's animal testing like once or twice, but Max even notes at one point that she's never actually seen an animal at any of the labs. So, at the same lab that they got Total from was in fact that cat with human eyes and fingers, suggesting some children wind up far more like animals than people. What if Total was once a human, and just happens to now look totally like a dog? He can talk, he's as smart as a person, he can cry, and does a few times, and shedding tears is a purely human trait, like dogs do not cry tears. He also eats chocolate, and loves pop culture, and he knows so much about France. This is just a conspiracy theory that isn't true, but it's really funny fridge horror, mainly because Total later marries a completely normal dog, and that makes it weirder than it already was. It's so hot. I knew it was gonna be hot, but it was supposed to rain today. So I thought, I'll film today and it will be cool, so I can survive without the fan. I can't survive without the fan, but I'm doing it. sits weirdly on my chair. Okay. Maximum Ride was originally going to be a trilogy, and it only slightly feels like that. The third book does wrap up a lot of things, but it leaves pretty much everything open-ended. At the point it came out, I suspect sales were good enough that J. Patterson, his co-author, knew that there would be more books. Plus, giving definite answers and conclusions is just not something that Max Ride does. This is the series of dangling threads, and it will be only downhill from here. The first chapter of Book 3 introduces the evil plot that ITEX has, laying out the idea that they want to reduce the world's population by 1/2. However, this extremely important plot point is altered in various ways as the book goes on, so it's unclear if they actually want to cull the population by 1/2, or by like 90%. It's definitely genocide though, just a very poorly planned one. ITEX seems to desire a kind of eugenic genocide to evolve humanity to survive through some apocalypse, while also being the pollutants that are apparently causing the apocalypse, while also selling mutants and robots to different countries as weapons. Like, are they ending the world or surviving the end? Are the other nations cool with ITEX trying to kill billions of people as long as they get robot armies? Unclear. ITEX is very much a generic bad guy company existing only to be evil. This book sets up the idea of ordinary kids being able to stop global war crime corporations with their protesting and riots. But the company is so removed from reality, it doesn't feel like an inspiring message. It's cool a bunch of kids get to stop ITEX, I guess, but the lack of cohesion in ITEX as a whole means it can't really be inspiring. Like, this isn't a guidebook on how evil companies work and how to stop them, and ITEX is not a metaphor for eugenics or fascism or pollution. It's just this vague blob of evil that doesn't translate into real life. At the start of the book, the flock is aimless in their mission as usual. The voice informs Max that ITEX has retired all erasers and all their experiments in general. This doesn't make any sense, of course. ITEX at no point shows the readiness for Armageddon where they would no longer need their wolf army. But yeah, they have killed all of the erasers. A chapter or two later, however, the erasers are back. You can pretty much count on every twist in Max Ride to be undone at some point or another, and this one is hilariously fast just in turning around. It does turn out, though, that these are robot erasers, which are dubbed Flyboys. On rereading, it is kind of weird how Maximum Ride exists in this world that has both highly successful but unreplicable genetic mutants and extremely high-tech robotics. It feels like one corporation shouldn't have both. Like, maybe their mutants would be better if they focused on just them, rather than diversifying into two very different fields. So, Fang and the others want to stop playing the game of the school and find a safe haven to just settle down. They want to just leave this experiment. Max is reluctant but agrees, and Fang and her go about looking for a place to live. While searching, Max and Fang kiss again. Meanwhile, the rest of the flock is captured. Max and Fang wind up in Arizona at Dr. Martinez's home. Max insists Dr. Martinez remove the chip from her hand, even though it's risky. While high on painkillers, Max confesses that she loves Fang. The romantic arc between the two is obvious, like Max and Fang both fully love each other. But it never actually resolves in this book, and it will take many, many more books before it will. Though Dr. Martinez removes the chip, Max's left hand is damaged and she's unable to move it. Also, the voice is still in her head, which confirms that it doesn't come from the chip. It might as well be supernatural at this point, like the voice, because it's never actually established how it functions. At Dr. Martinez's house, Fang finds a photo the flock once found of a baby Gazzy hidden in her bookshelf, fittingly stashed between one on birds and one on human experimentation. Not very subtle, that one. The book will get to this plotline much later, but I should address it now for clarity. Dr. Martinez does turn out to have been involved in the creation of Max. This makes no sense and is an obvious retcon. So in the first book, Dr. Martinez represents Max's first experience of a home and a mother, especially as Max acts as a mother to the flock. Dr. Martinez doesn't freak out at her wings, but that is seemingly because she's just a kind and smart adult. She can tell that Max is in some shit and doesn't want to go to the hospital or call the police. She knows that Max is in trouble and knows as an adult she should be non-judgmental and caring without pushing her obvious boundaries. She finds out that Max is a bird mutant, and I think that any of us would have some sense to swallow the reaction and not freak out. If a kid that I met in obvious trouble suddenly turned out to be like a crazy mutant, I certainly know that my reaction would not be screaming in terror, because at the end of the day, it's like, well, that's a kid in trouble. We need to protect them. Like, I get Dr. Martinez here. But in book 3, the whole thing is heavily recontextualized in this kind of confusing and way that I dislike. So Dr. Martinez explicitly created Max, and the flock in general, to a degree. Seeing Max, the same age as the experiment she worked on before she was fired, I mean, it's not like there's droves of bird kids out there. She would have instantly known. The book says she wasn't sure, but more importantly, the luck and odds involved are ridiculous. Max found Dr. Martinez's daughter Ella being bullied by chance, and by chance stumbled upon Dr. Martinez's house. The house of the woman who made her. Like, what are the odds of that? There's a number of things in the books that are implied to have been set up by the school or by Jeb. The inexplicable credit card that the flock finds in New York under Max's name was probably just planted because they've been tracking the flock, and most of the random events were just secret tests in the end. But Max finding Dr. Martinez was so random, the notion she was meant to, and that Dr. Martinez has a link to her, I kind of draw the line there in terms of logic, because it sort of implies that either Max has found it through the most incredible of coincidences, which is what the book winds up on, or the book, like, is that the school somehow arranged all of that situation perfectly so that Max would find her way to Dr. Martinez again. So I really dislike this change. It's an obvious retcon to me. Anyways, Max and Fang leave, but they find that the flock has been kidnapped, and it isn't long before they're also kidnapped. They wake up tied to hospital beds inside the school, but Angel is missing. The Whitecoats inform them that they're at the school, but also, they never left. All of the last 2 books have been a dream. Yes. Really? In fact, the scientists then go on to say that the flock's time in Colorado with Jeb was also a dream, which contradicts their timeline of the dream being 5 months long, because that was like 2 years ago. Max realizes that her left hand works again and that the scars from her surgery are gone. Total, who they saw on a bed for a brief moment, isn't there anymore. And Angel has seemingly betrayed them because she thinks that as the one with the most powers, she should be the leader, so she's working with the Whitecoats. The book really tries to keep you going about this, like, dream twist. Obviously it is a lie, but they keep you going for a while in ways that don't make sense. Max's hand working again might be because the school has advanced science, like, sure, like, her scars could be healed by some fancy science, I buy all of that. Except later her scars reappear like magic when they later escape the school. I'm not convinced that magic isn't real in Maximum Ride, as it is the only way to comprehend some of the things going on. For example, seemingly to randomly taunt the flock, the scientists bring out the same photo of baby Gazzy with his apparent mom. But the photo begins to zoom out and spin, showing images not in the frame and revealing Gazzy's mom sold him for $10,000. Maybe. I mean, it's probably a lie, but who knows at this point. Also at the school is Ari. All of the erasers have been retired, but because Ari is due to die soon anyways, they let him live. He's Jeb's son, and they're like, oh, he's gonna die in like a month, so they were just keeping him around. All the experiments evidently have a expiration day that manifests as a neck tattoo when the time draws close, and Ari has like a month left. He is over his hatred for Max because he is terribly depressed about his coming death. He is also 7, just to remind everybody, he is literally 7 years old. A man named Ter Borscht Terborscht. I'm gonna struggle with that name a bit. Luckily, he's not that important. So, a man named Terborscht, suddenly he's the head of mutant making, it seems. He shows up to talk to the flock. He explains in an annoyingly phonetically written accent that ITEX plans to cut the world's population with their re-evolution plan, also called the by-half plan, which will result in a world population of under 1 billion. They really aren't very good scientists, these lots. They're really bad at math. Again, we're gonna get the population to under 1 billion, so we'll call it the by-half plan. They're really bad scientists. Specifically, they want a world of only useful people without illness or weakness, and the flock has been ultimately deemed as failures of experiments. They are considering selling them to China as weapons, though. The flock irritates Terborscht enough that he sends them out to be killed in a field. I really don't get why the school always decides to execute the flock via open-air spaces. At this point, Max reveals that Angel isn't actually a traitor, despite even Max's internal thought processes sounding like Max was shocked by the betrayal. This is because Maximum Ride is the kind of book that will just lie to you. Max and Angel instead made this fake betrayal plan just in case, and with Angel's help, they escape. Ari also helps, and Max calls for him to come with, as she's become sympathetic to him over this brief period of captivity. Fang, however, is pissed off that Max has done this, and the flock in general isn't pleased to hang out with Ari. This leads to them splitting up, as they also have different ideas on what they should do to save the world. Max thinks that Fang thinks that his blog should do something, and wants to go to People magazine to spread the word. Max wants to go and investigate ITEX overseas and find their headquarters. Fang, Iggy, and Gazzy then head west, while Max, Nudge, Angel, and Ari go east. They actually spend the rest of the book in these two groups. Max, though, is the only one who actually does anything. Dividing the flock makes the already episodic plot feel even more so, with a lot of the page count then being taken up by silly adventures that don't contribute to anything in particular. Like, I'm not going to talk about pretty much anything that happens to Fang, because they do nothing, okay? So, Fang's crew goes to LA, they barge into People magazine, and they're kicked out, with Fang not even thinking of showing his wings to keep their attention. So that plot thread is dropped, and now they have no purpose to be in LA. They sulk around as Fang writes on the blog that he started, talking very openly about who he is, where he is, and what's going on with the flock. Pretty bold for someone being openly hunted to death. But kids around the world are really motivated to go take on ITEX, and Fang even emails all of them at once. Like, every single kid in the world. He hacks computers with the help of a guy so that he can send an email to every single child in the world with a bold call to action. Except his call to action is less like a plan on how to save the world, and it's more just a short speech about how kids can do stuff and ITEX is evil. It's one of the least inspiring grand speeches and a real waste of sending an email to every single child in the world. Max's squad, meanwhile, is in Europe. Among tourist activities, they learn that ITEX's headquarters is in Germany. The Nazi parallels are not subtle, but they are very toothless, I would say. Like, as much as ITEX craves global genocide and eugenics, the message is very fuzzy on how that is bad, which, like, I know it's obvious, kind of to a degree, and the book relies on that. But what I mean is that there's no deeper ideas than evil here. We're not really confronting the idea of, like, it's one thing when you're explaining ideas of good and evil to be like, this is bad and this is good. But if you're unable to explain why something is bad besides it's obvious, then it becomes very important. It becomes very difficult to kind of defend and explain your viewpoints if you're unable to word what good and bad actually means. So as much as the book relies on the fact that we all know Nazis are bad and eugenics is bad, there's not really anything explaining why this is so and why this is a flawed viewpoint and we should understand how this is happening. Like, it's... I hope I'm making sense there, because this honestly really did quite annoy me. To talk about evil, I think we need to understand it not as evil, but as a series of bad ideas, and ITEX exists entirely as the final stage of those bad ideas. At one point, the propaganda of ITEX states the new world must be pure, without unnecessary, flawed people, but also that races and genders will all be equal. The mutants at ITEX are literally goose-stepping, but the philosophy they follow is vague, and without specifics, it seems impossible to fight or counter this viewpoint. The only viewpoint that we can get for the heroes is just, this is bad and it must be stopped. We all can comprehend that, but it is kind of a meaningless point if you can't further explain why. And yeah, they just can't. Obviously, Maximum Ride is no place to learn about the Holocaust or genocide. It is Maximum Ride. But the book is actively invoking the language and imagery of Nazi Germany, but weakening and obscuring it. Kids' books very much can and do have dark themes and can serve as a way for kids to learn about and feel more confident in the face of dark times. But the way ITEX is handled, I'm not sure what the takeaway is meant to be. Very often, it seems like it's about pollution, instead of, like, killing all disabled people. And in fact, that's something that's gonna continue through the series. Like, I'm not a fan of watering down fascism like that to ignore the ableism in favor of the kind of easier topic of pollution, as it were. And as the series continues, it will much more lean on the bad guys are polluting the world really badly, more than examining at all the fact that the bad guys consistently talk about killing all disabled people. Like, one of those we might want to talk about in a little more detail, and we won't. Anyways, Max's crew is captured while infiltrating ITEX. Not long before, like, they just sent Fang an email asking for help, so he does know where they are. While they're held there, they meet the director of ITEX. The director introduces herself as Max's mother. Immediately, there's recognition, as she looks a lot like Max, and she even talks in a similar tone of voice and style to Max. I mean, it seems like it's so obvious there, but as previously said, well, there's a lot of parental twists in this series. Jeb is also there, vaguely trying to help while being a bastard as usual. It's worth noting Jeb probably talks to Ari like twice in the series, and primarily ignores his son. Like, I hate Jeb, and we should all hate Jeb. Jeb at this point reveals he is the voice. He speaks out loud exactly as it does. And this reveal makes a bit of sense. The voice and Jeb talk alike, and they have the same sort of nonsense goals for Max about saving the world. However, it will be retconned later in the series, and it's never explained how he projects his voice directly into Max's brain and knows whatever she thinks. Max and Ari further reconcile while trapped in ITEX's dungeon. Max actually has to teach him how to spell his own name, because his dad sure never taught him. They are let out to exercise every so often in a very large enclosed yard with hundreds of other experiments, including Max 2 and a newly revealed Nudge 2 and Angel 2. Nudge 2 and Angel 2 will never reappear. We have always been told that the only successful mutants were the Erasers and the Flock, but again, there's like hundreds of them here, and every day ITEX is apparently killing a few hundred at a time. The director takes Max to be assessed by Ter Borscht more, as well as some Chinese scientists who are interested in their capabilities. I'm gonna kind of just go ahead and call the selling the flock to the Chinese plotline, I'm gonna call that plotline a bit racist, and we're gonna leave it there. There's some questionable writing out, I would say, of accents, maybe a little bit, and the whole concept. Let's leave it there. Jeb reveals to Max that he is her father. People somehow following the plot so far may remember that that was made clear at the end of Book 1, when he yelled at Max for killing Ari by saying that Ari was her brother. Despite this, Max didn't think about it at all in Book 2, or up until this point. She is floored by the notion that she is Jeb's daughter and that Ari is in fact her half-brother. Jeb also reveals that the director is not Max's mother, but likely thinks of her as a daughter. This is contrary to the fact that they look and act alike and all of those hints. I mean, the director talks quite a bit about how she gave up her only daughter Max to research and all, but, you know, this book series will just lie to you. It turns out that Max's real mother is Dr. Martinez. Straight up. Dr. Martinez worked at ITEX with her vet knowledge and donated her eggs, but was fired before she ever saw Max really be made. This is a very strange situation when you think of it. Beyond me pointing out how inexplicable it is that Max randomly stumbled into her creator and mother, Dr. Martinez donated some eggs, and Jeb, her co-worker, fertilized those eggs? Like, isn't that extremely weird? No matter your interest in science or your boss, like, no matter how much you think, like, this is for science, I don't mind, I'll donate my eggs because we need eggs for genetic material, but I think it's for the greater good. No matter what, isn't it weird for your boss to fertilize your eggs? Like, somebody has to. But ethically, a random selected donor makes way more sense rather than your boss, who you know. Just, you know this guy, and it's just like, why did Jeb decide? There's some concerns, that's all. ITEX takes the group to a rally, where a bunch of international representatives are observing. It's basically a weapons show, as ITEX shows off all sorts of crazy sci-fi inventions and experiments that will never occur in the book series ever again. Among them is the next stage human, a boy named Omega. The director uses Max as an example of a previous experiment and a point of comparison, making her test against Omega and fight him. Max, though, points out how stupid it is and even beats him at one point, which is a pretty bad look for ITEX. Angel stirs up a riot among the crowds of mutants who are made to watch this. Really not safe, by the way, putting hundreds of mutants slated for death in the audience of your international arms show. Fighting breaks out and Ari suddenly dies. Not from combat, he just expires. Jeb rushes to the son that he abused for all these years and cries, telling Max now how to best Omega's secret weakness. As the mutants riot from outside the gate, a bunch of kids also show up to riot. They begin pelting rocks over the walls, and one girl drives her car straight through the gates. Max takes the director and flies her into the sky to shake her down for answers. Not useful ones, mind you, mainly to confirm that Dr. Martinez is indeed her mother. Also, the director reveals that she is 107 years old, though she doesn't look it, because she is part Galapagos turtle. This is a very inexplicable detail that, at the very least, does confirm she is a straight-up Nazi. Max does not kill the director, and they leave. Notably, of course, in this climax, Fang and his gang don't really do anything. They try to go to Germany to help, but they don't manage it, and just in the epilogue they regroup, and that's it. Ari is not mentioned after his death, but Jeb is just sort of forgiven. Apparently his excuse is that he was just helping them in secret the whole time, avoiding being caught by the director, and he's sorry. Sorry just doesn't cut it. I hate Jeb. He, strictly doesn't harm the kids more than psychologically with his betrayal. But what he did to my boy Ari is an unforgivable crime. Yet in the epilogue, he's just kind of awkwardly there as the flock reunites at Dr. Martinez's home. I'm gonna say it. Fuck Jeb. The flock then flies off onto the sunset, basically vaguely saying they might be back and they have to go save the world more. As unclear as they always have been on exactly what they're up to. At the end of the day, I mean, the first series of books of Maximum Ride is slightly good. Not good, not great. I wouldn't really recommend it to adults. If you were a fan of it originally, I think that rereading it for nostalgia will probably pay off. But if you've never read it before, I wouldn't really recommend picking it up. But a kid of the right age can probably still have a blast of Maximum Ride. I think that, you know, like a tween, this would definitely do quite well. It's quite great. I mean, not great. Maybe not good, but I mean, it is what it is, and I do like it enough. However, despite my genuine enjoyment and nostalgia for revisiting series that I know so well, I probably should note that, yeah, it isn't really a steep hill that we're heading towards. Like, we're already kind of on a pretty low hill in front of a ditch. It wasn't a high is what I'm saying. It's not like the first trilogy was a work of art and the downhill came from nowhere. As said, it's a very rickety roller coaster built on cheap twists, and the downfall, and I mean, there's episodic skits, and look, it just simply doesn't hold up under any deeper evaluation. You shake it and it falls to pieces and leaves you a bit annoyed. And that's okay for some series. It doesn't have to aspire too high. But for what it aspires to, I don't know. It's also notable that the series does fail in many specific ways that books ideally just shouldn't be failing. The plots are slapdash, yes, but the characters are too. Like, as much as the joys of the series is the close-knit flock, they are extremely static characters. I write this with my foreknowledge too. The entire cast is limited to 1 or 2 patterns of behavior and just sort of repeats that, not really learning anything new or developing. This is especially true of side characters like Nudge and Gazzy, and it's kind of rough I call them side characters, but they are. But even Max is a very static figure in the end. It's also worth talking about some of the dated jokes. Mostly, a surprising amount of the jokes kind of hold up. They're silly and dumb, but they're fun, and I like some of them. I had a couple laughs at some goofs. I'll admit it. I'll admit to the goofs. But a few are just really dated in a cringe-inducing way. One of the most notable ones is the word schizo. So it's used a fair amount, like once per book, just to kind of mean crazy, just as anorexia is used as a joke once before. I've talked about this before, and it's pretty common in bad YA paranormal romance books too, and just bad YA in general. I really hate language about health disorders that is used as insults or casual slang. We shouldn't do it. That's kind of obvious. But back in the day, people really weren't as tuned to the idea that maybe jokes about eating disorders or mental illness could actually be actively harmless. So yeah, that's uncool, and this book has several examples of that, which I really did not like. Max's inner dialogue, in fact, is also kind of odd at times. Like, she's speaking the whole book, making sarcastic, light comments, etc., but she makes a lot of references to things that I don't think a homeless mutant 14-year-old would know. And in general, the flock in total sling out a surprising amount of dated pop culture references. And like, I mean dated old for the 2000s. Like, Max at one point references a Soviet ice skater from the 80s, who I have barely heard of. But for her to just drop it casually, I believe in like the first chapter of a book, is so unbelievable for who she's meant to be. Overall, though, I mean, the first trilogy is a strong set of books for what it is. It's of the time, it's lackluster, but it's enjoyable enough. And now it's gonna get worse, as I keep saying, but this really is the turning point. But first, a movie. Maximum Ride, like most YA series from the time, was optioned for a film. It actually was first announced in 2007, before the big wave of like failed YA adaptations that we had, but was trapped in development hell for ages. This is extremely common. I mean, pretty much any YA series from the 2010s will have a similar stub on its Wikipedia page. There'll be something about movie rights and then nothing. And this is because film adaptation rights are often sold along with publishing rights. And then they are bought up by studios just in case the book is a success and they want to pursue production. Very rarely will they actually pursue production. This is what happened with Lightlark, for example. The film rights are often sold but rarely actually followed through on. Maximum Ride was a huge success, so its film adaptation had more progress than most. There was a writer and director attached by 2012, but no news on if it ever entered production proper. Especially when the writer then died in 2013. This probably would have been and should have been the end of the Maximum Ride movie. When you think of it, it's both perfect for film with its very snappy action and dialogue, but it's also doomed. Like, the effects budget would be super high, and flying is notorious for looking really goofy on film. In all honesty, I think Maximum Ride is one of those things that would be far better suited to be animated. I mean, I think that about pretty much everything, but yeah, it's very much the kind of series that feels cartoony in a lot of ways, and it would look nicer in animation. The Maximum Ride movie then languished in the forgotten depths of failed early 2010s movie adaptations. No one was paying attention. and no one really cared by 2016. Like, we all had other things on our minds, which is why a movie trailer dropping felt like a prank. Like, maybe something fan-made. But it wasn't. No, in 2016, Maximum Ride released a movie adaptation. Not to theaters, so it's very, very likely most people have no idea this thing exists. I don't even know how I heard of it. I was completely out of the fandom at that point. It is entirely official, this film, but it feels like it's fan-made. It's very bad, and it's not even bad in the way that's fun to discuss or watch. Like, you couldn't really have that slapping of a movie night to the Maximum Ride film. It just exists. And yeah, as promised, there's a very specific weird name attached. I'm hoping that I can include the entire trailer now. I don't really know who's watching the copyright for the Maximum Ride film, so hopefully we can put as much of it as possible in.
There are some things in life that are out of our control. Why do you think you were created in the first place?
They're not human. The most dangerous mistake is to think of them as if they are.
They experimented on us like lab rats. And now we have to run and hide just to stay alive.
Everything was a lie. This is all part of some master plan. So what do?
We fight. I almost lost you. And you're willing to risk everything.
They know we're here.
If we can't control them, they're expendable.
There's no way out, Max.
There's always a way out.
So yeah, the film isn't really worth a watch. I mean, the most notable thing about it are the flesh slits that they opted for to hide the wings. These are gross, but interesting. I hate them, but dig them a little. Otherwise, the movie adapts the first half of the first book loosely in the most boring way possible. It's hard to understand how the movie happened. There's very little information out there about it and up to its release. It sort of appeared one day on the internet and that was it. And honestly, that is all there is to say about it. It exists and that is it. Oh, and Jenna Marbles made it? Like, there's that? Jenna Marbles? Jenna Marbles is, if you don't remember her or know her, one of the, like, original top YouTubers. She very wisely left a few years ago, but her videos are still rather enjoyable. They're kind of just comfortable fun. She mostly vlogged and did like funky little projects, and she had some alien entities that she disguised as dogs. Yeah, she has some good videos. Sometimes I watch that if I'm, you know, feeling down and just want something nice and easy on the background. Her link to Maximum Ride movie, that's a mystery to me, and it seems to be a mystery to everybody. Looking into it reveals very little information besides her attachment as one of the executive producers. It's not like she made a video about it or spoke on the subject as far as I can tell. She's just linked, and I have no idea why. And it's so puzzling to me to look at Jenna. It's like I don't know, it would be like if H. Bomber Guy produced the Warrior Cats movie in 2020, like when we weren't paying attention behind our backs, there was a Warrior Cats movie, and then just in the trailer it's like H. Bomber Guy, and we'd all just be like, well, that doesn't quite add up, but here we are. So yeah, if anyone knows more about Jenna Marbles and Maximum Ride, I am begging that you tell me, because that is the one thing about this movie that's any interest to me. What happens when something meant to be a trilogy just keeps going and going? Well, we have this book. In fact, a lot of people's memories of Maximum Ride live in the series post the first three because it's hard to forget the crushing disappointment of just how bad the later books are. You might recall liking the first three, but the feeling of book 4 is much more memorable. So book 4 is called The Final Warning, and it is ridiculous. It's really hard to explain the feeling of this book if you haven't read it. It feels wrong. It is just empty and random and nothing, and feels like it doesn't exist even as you're reading it. Maximum Ride is a book series that lies to you, and by this point, I think it might be a series that actively hates you. The book starts by establishing a new bad guy, the Uber Director. Previous bad guys, like the Director, were never really given much depth, but the Uber Director is even shallower. He has an army of robots, not the Flyboys of the last book, and his plan is to abduct the flock in order to sell them. The logistics and logic of this is not really expanded upon, and the UB declares his intent to auction them long before he even has them captured. He's planning the auction, and he's like, well, we better capture him soon, because, I mean, I'm putting him on the market in 2 weeks. He's linked to iTex vaguely, and his link to the world building as a whole, it's not really expanded on, and he dies by the end without having achieved anything. I am talking about him a lot up front because he's barely in the book and we're barely going to mention him again. But to be fair, there is barely anything in the book at all. Maximum Ride constantly as a story is pushed by random events and lacking any coherence, and that's all the more obvious in the final warning. At the start of the book, the flock is burying Ari in the woods with Jeb and Dr. Martinez. Jeb being allowed here seems constantly wrong, but the flock has accepted him somehow as trustworthy. After all he did, including actively cause the death of his 7-year-old son with his abuse, Jeb is now like an awkward reformed villain dad. And that's a great trope, except Jeb isn't reformed, he's just around. Dr. Martinez and him have arranged for the flock to talk to the government in DC. Exactly why isn't clear. I mean, if the amount of times I've said that this video is probably ridiculous, but exactly why isn't unclear. Isn't really clear. Oh, my brain is also frying because it's extremely hot out. And no one involved seems to know. The government officials they talk to seem to vaguely want to study the flock or send them to an actual school. The flock doesn't want to do this, and that night somebody sends them a bomb inside of a pizza. The pizza bomb is never explained, it's just that kind of book. Also, Nudge is now magnetic, and Iggy can identify the colors of things by touch. Almost everyone gains a new power in this book, and none of them actually are used to do any of them. Almost all of them are not mentioned again after this book. It's always such an annoyance, by the way, when characters suddenly gain powers and don't bother to figure out the limits or ever actually use them, and Maximum Ride is one of the worst offenders of that. Max's voice chats to her, but this time the voice states it is not Jeb. Quizzing Jeb on the matter, he says that he can do the voice, but is not the voice, and that it's all part of the bigger picture. This is code for it being a meaningless twist that will never be settled, literally. The flock goes to another government meeting to no result, and then they head out to go fly aimlessly. Fang discovers he's invisible if he sits really still, and then he and Max kiss again. Their relationship drama is an increasing theme, and it's entirely a series of scenes where they kiss, and then Max just, like, jumps out a window and flies away. Or they bicker about jealousy. The flock feels directionless without a goal to work towards, and the book does too. Angel reveals she can now shapeshift, though she only has 2 forms, a black girl and a bird of paradise in human shape. Cool. The voice in Max's head begins to direct her to a specific spot and informs her that Dr. Martinez is there, so off they go. Meeting again with the adults, Dr. Martinez reveals that she has something for them to do. She doesn't offer any more information, but these very paranoid mutant kids just accept and take a private jet to Argentina, and from there a car ride, finally arriving at a boat. Here they are told that Dr. Martinez has suggested them to go on an Antarctic mission. You see, the final warning is a global warming book. It was the same time as In Inconvenient Truth, and rather feels like James Patterson as co-author had like just seen that movie and decided it'd be a good book idea, and it's not. Iggy asks in chapter 31, as we somehow near halfway through the book, what the heck is global warming? And so the interchangeable scientists on the research vessel explain. Max, hilariously, doesn't believe in global warming for the majority of the book. Also, I should know I'm saying global warming because the book says global warming, It's strange to think about, but at the time, that was the term. I remember when I first learned about global warming, around the same time as a lot of people did. And yeah, we called it global warming. It's now global climate change because we better understand that it's much more complicated than just things are overall getting hotter. There's a lot more going on. But yes, the book uses global warming because that's just commonly what we all said. The flock takes a boat to Antarctica, and on this boat, Fang hangs out with a 21-year-old researcher who seems into him. It's just here to make Max jealous and add drama to the romance, but I have to bring it up because, like, the scientist is an adult who is seemingly mutually into this 14-year-old boy, even though they don't engage in any sort of romantic activity ever. The fact that everyone sort of rolls with the notion that this is happening possibly, that they might be into each other, that's kind of strange. Anyways, Iggy discovers he can see the color white if it is the only color in the vicinity. Cool. Also on board is a dog named Aquila. She is a Malamute, and Total is instantly smitten by her. This raises so many ethical questions about dog romance. Mainly, is Total enough of a dog that this isn't weird? This isn't really, like, there's no plot to this book, so let's just all talk about dog romance for a hot second. Total bemoans the fact that Aquila won't talk to him in the universal language, whatever that means. Mostly it confirms to us that he cannot communicate with this regular dog. There is no dog language uniting them, at least not one that they share. He is still utterly smitten by her, though. They both look like dogs, but really, at what point is Total not a dog? Like, at what point does it feel like bestiality for him to be so in love with Aquila? Later, Total and Aquila get stuck in an ice crevasse, and Total has to ask Angel to use her talk with animals ability to calm Aquila down. These guys are not the same species, and Total cannot talk to her. They should not be in love. But again, I know for a fact in one of the next books, there will be a dog wedding. Even if Aquila was to inexplicably later gain the ability to speak, I'm not sure I'd find that any more comforting. I think that Total is a grown man, and I think he should not date this dog. Anyways, the flock arrives in Antarctica. What use do a bunch of climate scientists have with some bird kids? No one knows. We only see one thing that they actually do, and it's to go look at some penguins with another researcher. They don't appear to contribute at all, and the closest role that they have is that they're just media-worthy mutants, and thus they can be good advocates. They really don't do jack otherwise. While watching penguins, one of the researchers is grabbed and killed by a leopard seal. This sudden, quite grisly death would be shocking, but it turns out that she was a secret robot working for the Uber director. I couldn't swear if this character had even had a line before her death, and honestly, the reveal that she's a robot does not impact the book at all. What I can tell you is that about the same time, it is revealed that Total is now growing his own set of wings. Angel wanders off alone to try and pet a baby penguin with the dogs, and gets wedged in the ice crevasse as said. In the middle of a blizzard, Max and Fang go looking for her and save her, but they have to bunker down to wait out the storm. While they're bunkered down together, the UB's henchman Gozan, basically just Frankenstein's monster, finds and kidnaps them. They're brought to a warehouse where conveniently the rest of the flock has also been kidnapped, and then they're taken to Miami. So, yeah, the Antarctica plot was absolutely nothing. That is the main focus of the book, and it is nothing. We're now hitting the end of the story, in fact, and I'm hoping that this summary is making clear, like, how little has happened. In Miami, the flock meets with the Uber director as he starts up a video call with the despots of the world in order to auction the flock. It's worth noting the UB is also a series of plexiglass organs stacked in a wheelchair with a head attached. I didn't mention that. It wasn't really that important, but yeah, he's just a bunch of boxes. I don't know, man. The flock being auctioned is just really another scene that exists for them to crack jokes as dictators ask them about their skills. And it's identical to several other scenes exactly like this in the series so far. The auction itself is such a dumb concept, and yeah, to bring the word dumb into the world of Maximum Ride is a risky idea. It's all a little dumb, and we do accept that, but the UB set up an auction of the flock before he'd even captured them, and now a bunch of evil people are willing to spend millions on these mutant teens who can't be controlled or weaponized in the slightest. Like the selling to China plot last book, the implication is that they'd be great weapons. And like, maybe they would be if they weren't a bunch of rebellious children. As the auction happens, a Category 5 hurricane is hitting Miami. It's the off-season because, you know, global warming and all. In fact, the skyscraper then hits the... I mess up that sentence because I'm overheating, but also it's ridiculous. So the Category 5 off-season hurricane then hits the skyscraper that they're in because, yes, they are having this meeting in a skyscraper during a hurricane. It shatters the safety glass windows and the flock is able to escape. They tumble about before they find the eye of the storm to hunker down in. Aquila is seemingly dead and lost as she was abducted with them, but she tumbles out of the sky and lands on Max, entirely fine. Max spots the Uber director and Gozen being just tossed around in the hurricane like Wizard of Oz style, so she flies up and drop kicks them, ensuring their deaths. We just sort of move on after that. Like, Max admits that global warming is bad and real, so she goes and has a chapter-long speech to Congress about how bad pollution is and how America needs to stop climate change. And that's it. The epilogue is that Congress has apparently built a school for mutants, despite the flock rejecting the idea multiple times. And they attend the opening ceremony, but then the voice tells Max that she has more work to do, so they fly off. And yeah, gee. So that's book 4, The Final Warning. This is really the book that tells any young fan to lower their expectations, yet it'll still only be disappointment from here on out. Like, Maximum Ride is a best-selling series, and I have to wonder how much money you have to make before you just sort of give up and write a sequel like this. It's not hard to imagine making Maximum Ride work as a coherent series. You see, the trick would be to decide a plot ahead of time, and then you pick out some twists ahead of time, and then you just sort of write a book, maybe a good book. But that's not what James Patterson and his, army of ghosts went with. They wrote The Final Warning. Jesus Christ, am I warm? I think that something was so bad about The Final Warning that J. Patz and his crew of, by now, I'm sure many ghostwriters, sat down and had a meeting about it. It's still sold, obviously, but it sucked and just everybody knows it. It sucks so much that Maximum Ride now is divided into 2 series, basically, where the first 3 books are their own kind of arc, called, The Fugitives, and then the second arc is called The Protectors. And The Final Warning is not in either of those arcs. It's just left out. I'm not sure if you're selling a box set where you even put The Final Warning, because I think that I think that James Patterson would like it if it was not included in the series at all. Certainly, a lot of stuff that happens in it is not really harkened back to ever again. So yeah. Final Warning sucked, and everybody knew that. So I like to think that J. Paps, he took out a big dry erase board and he wrote, what if the villain had a motive that made sense? And then he circled it 5 times. And then maybe they underlined the word motive a few times, and maybe somebody wrote plot just somewhere off to the side. So anyway, Max, a Maximum Ride novel, is okay. Its name is pretty silly. Every single book has been called Maximum Ride with then a subtitle in smaller letters below. But Max subverts that. From here on out, too, the next 3 books follow this trend. Character name, a novel. I remember when it first came out, I didn't really understand what a novel meant. I still strictly don't, because it can mean so many different things. I figured it meant that, unlike the others, this was a more serious book. This wasn't a book. This was Max. A novel. I really don't understand what that means still, but I guess it worked on me because I was again excited for Maximum Ride, thinking it might get good again. This one's called a novel. And on this reread, it kind of is? Ish? In many ways, Book 5, Max, feels computer written. It performs the task of a Maximum Ride book, or novel, but it doesn't stand out besides. If anything, I think this proves some turning point in the series, like J-Pat moving to majority ghostwriting rather than personally working on Max Ride, but that's just like a baseless theory. I mean, like, it's just a baseless book theory. Max and the flock are hanging out performing air shows to raise awareness of global warming and pollution. Yes, they are now fully famous, but the world never really seems to acknowledge this. For the first full trilogy, the world learning about mutants was slowly taking place in the background. And by now, they are publicly part of the CSM, which is the Coalition to Stop the Madness, doing flying air shows to sold-out stadiums across the world. I think that, if the world learned tomorrow about real flying mutant kids, it would be madness and everybody would know everything about mutants involved. And I think that that was true in like 2009 as well. Maximum Ride, though, wants to have the best of both worlds, as they both are advocates doing big speeches and somehow able to blend in with normal people, or surprise them with having wings. No one should be surprised by the wings by now. Like, there's mutant bird people, and we have so much footage of their faces. It's such a huge discovery, I guess, it would be impossible to not hear about it. Yet they still seem surprised that someone from Hollywood wants to talk to them about movie rights. And for the rest of the series, it's a case of pretty much nobody recognizes their faces, even though they should be the most famous landmark discovery, like, in our human society. Certainly in this generation, this century, like, they're mutant bird kids. That's pretty wild, guys. So after a cyborg with a gun for a hand fails to snipe them at an air show, the flock becomes aware that there's a new batch of bad guys around. These ones are dubbed Machine Geeks, or M-Geeks. I think that that is my least favorite name for the baddies so far. They realize that somebody wants to stop what the CSM is doing. And like, what is the CSM doing? Well, it's just as low impact as the flock's fame. They hand out leaflets and cards educating people on climate change. Like, I get the message, and it is 2009, so, I mean, man, I wish the CSM had been successful. But it is still lacking in purpose. For a book series about how kids can save the world or whatever, there's very little information about direct action or action in general. These aren't, like, even slightly replicable, here's what people should be doing to go and raise awareness or strike back. There's nothing. Like, what are the CSM's actual goals? What can be done about pollution? Like, what can people do? And how can we pressure governments? They got infographics. Max and the flock go into hiding again. Jeb approaches them with the idea of going to a normal school. Again. This one is called the Day and Night School, and it's different from the School for Gifted Kids last book, and we again get no information about what it's like. It's meant for gifted kids, but if that's a euphemism for more mutants, we never find out. When the flock later goes on tour, there's just nothing remarked on it. First, though, Max goes flying alone at night, and she's shot. She's abducted by a man named Mr. Chu. He informs her that he represents a group of very powerful and rich businessmen from across the world who plan to outlive the coming apocalypse. He asks Max to join them, but she refuses, so he dumps her out of his car. Why didn't he keep her? That is a very good question. Max doesn't explain her encounter with Mr. Chu to the flock, and they go check out the special school. While there, Nudge decides she wants to stay and be normal, and this has long been part of Nudge's story. I mean, I hesitate to say arc, but like all character arcs in the series, it's very short-lived and quite repetitive. She cries about being a freak and wanting her wings cut off, and decides that she wants to stay at school, even if it means being left behind. Max realizes that she can't force Nudge and has to accept her choice. At this point, a fax arrives telling them that Dr. Martinez has been kidnapped. A fax is one of the highest stake ways to be informed of a kidnapping, by the way. The flock needs to go find out where Dr. Martinez is and rescue her, giving us a very blessed sense of cohesion in the plot, about halfway through. For once, there is a goal that is extremely concrete. First, obviously, they have to go beat up some more M-Geeks, and As I said, I often skip smaller story beats in this series, usually because it's just a scene of, like, some baddies show up. But in this case, I do need to note something about the baddies showing up. Inexplicably, one of the M-Geeks is a bad clone of Ari. Why? A cheap spook, I guess. It's not Ari or a clone of him, just very similar looking, and he just winds up dead of the rest and that's it. The flock goes to grab another private jet. For kids who are trying to save the world, who literally have wings and flown across the ocean multiple times, they sure have yet to learn how insanely harmful private jets are. On that jet, also, is Aquila. This is one of at least 2 notable retcons from the book, because last book ended with the implication Aquila would travel with the flock. She is a very large dog and does not. The other retcon is with the scientist from last book. Her name is Dr. Brigid, who cares? And Dr. Brigid was maybe flirting with the 14-year-old Fang, right? She was 21 last book, but she is 20 now. And either ways, it's not a cool age gap, even though they haven't done anything. While they're on the jet, though, we do have a line I'd like to read, which is Total. So Total is not normal about Aquila, of course, and here's my quote on the matter. Total breathed, stopping dead. He stared up at Aquila as if he were a starving man and she was a Snickers bar. Yeah, I mean, do you see the issue in that quote already? He's a man. Man, he's a man. Total is no dog. Total should not be in love with this dog. We must stop him. Anyways, okay, look, Total's not a dog, but I still don't trust him, and it's still not clear if he can even talk to Aquila, but they are basically dating, with marriage being proposed by the end. The flock heads to a military base and learns that Dr. Martinez seems to be being held on a submarine. They have footage that shows a huge flock of birds going crazy around a small fishing boat, which is then sunk by a mysterious dark shape. Then they have footage of Dr. Martinez being held hostage with the day's newspaper, and outside of a porthole conveniently is a piece of the broken boat with its name on it. Very miraculous CSI coincidence skills here. I mean, they even zoom and enhance. Along with the footage, though, is an ominous phrase that was being played extremely slowly in the background. A voice that is saying, "The birds are working." The flock is ready to go chase after Dr. Martinez and find her, but now they're working with the US Navy in Hawaii, and the US Navy makes them all go through basic training before letting them go on a submarine, despite them being children the ages 14 to 6, and also they are mutants. This is one of those episodic skit bits where the flock just uses their skills and jokes to easily pass every test and just kill time. It's a sequence that has approximately appeared in most of the other books in the series, akin to the obligatory, like, flock wisecracks to flustered bad guys scenes. Iggy at one point, though, makes reference to his echolocation skills when he's swimming underwater, and it's not said sarcastically, despite being the first mention he's ever made of having echolocation. To be fair, I mean, I guess it is semi-implied that he has magic echolocation skills, but only by the merit of him being that, like, extremely perceptive blind guy trope. And also, again, we're never going to hear about Iggy's echolocation ever again. So Nudge then returns, randomly, and Nudge says that she was so worried about Dr. Martinez, but she did love going to school for a few days. Nothing is allowed to last in these books. Max and Fang have more romance drama, this time showing some growth as they semi-go on a date and they kiss in front of the flock. It almost feels like they're finally together. But no, things get so much worse on that front, guys. You don't even understand. Angel then begins insisting everyone in the flock practice breathing underwater, and that they will all develop gills soon. She's very defiant in this book, evolving more and more into some sort of, like, cryptic psychic child god. As the flock finally boards the submarine to look for Dr. Martinez, Angel more than once just climbs out of the submarine somehow while it's underwater, just to swim around and flaunt her water breathing and talking to fish. When the sub is attacked by M-Geeks underwater, she somehow talks to them and convinces them to leave. A hint towards the future Angel is evil plotline that is never really explained. The flock and the submarine achieve nothing and just sort of flounce around for a bit. Eventually, they're struck by a giant sea monster, described like a vast mountain suddenly rising from nowhere to attack. And yes, it is a sea monster. I'd remembered this fact, but I was still so surprised by like the funkiness of it being just like a literal sea monster. It's great. Angel then gets a brain reading from the monster and explains that it isn't like a person or an alien or even really a mutant, but it does have thoughts and intelligence and just wants to kill everything. I sort of enjoy a big creepy sea monster as a threat, and I really hate how they are wasted in this book. The scientists on the submarine crew reckon that maybe the sea monsters are a result of radiation from somewhere in the ocean, and they go looking. Angel jumps into the sea to free swim again, and Max and the others have to go looking for her. While doing so, Max gets lost in an underwater cave. Her flashlight breaks, and she gets attacked by an octopus. I think that that is my worst, highly specific nightmare. The octopus then rips off her breathing apparatus, but she finds that Angel was right, and she can now breathe underwater. It turns out that Fang can as well, but no one else. Yet. They eventually will all gain the ability to breathe underwater. They encounter the sea monsters again, who range in the size from a car to a 747 airplane. They're covered in bumpy, like, pickle-like skin, which is full of gashes and open sores, excreting at all times just, like, thick, translucent ooze. They're just really, really rather unpleasant. It's unclear what they used to be, and I kind of enjoy the deep-sea horror ambiguity going on with them. They're these living manifestations of pollution and mankind's hubris, which I'm like super into. And plus, I just love a gigantic, scary, gross monster. I think they're great. So the subs find a bunch of barrels of radioactive waste, helpfully labeled property of the Chew Corporation. The flock realizes that Mr. Chew wants the CSM to stop because they've been advocating against pollution, and if people clean the ocean, they'd find his illegally dumped waste. It's not that exciting a plot, but wow, I was so floored by it. Like a Maximum Ride book giving any event cause and effect? A villain that even vaguely is acting slightly logical? It's astonishing. So Angel goes free swimming again, like I think it's the 5th time in the book at least. She gets apparently attacked by the sea monsters, but then reveals she's been managing to communicate with them, and the sea monsters are now friends. The largest one is named Gore, and they call their species the Krelp, showing they have a sense of identity beyond animals. Angel can talk to animals and read minds, but again, the Krelp appear to be fully sentient, rather than her understanding beast speech. She notes, for example, most animals have very simple thoughts. The Krelp, though, are seemingly an entirely new sapient species with full sentience, and they don't appear after this book, which is a total waste of potential. I love the Krelp. I love the Krelp. I love them so much. I just want the Krelp to be okay. So Angel explains on their behalf that the Krelp are genetic mutants from the radioactive waste and that they've been attacking boats because the fishing boats have been damaging their eggs and their babies. They're all very sickly from the radiation and hate the Chew Corporation specifically, meaning they somehow are able to read or understand exactly who did this to them. They are in constant pain. They are eager to help the flock, and the ominous message of "the birds are working" is slightly explained, but not really. When Max goes near the Krelp, she hears her own voice and the voice repeat the message several times, and later it's then completed to "the birds are working, they're working to help us." The birds here may be the flock, and the Krelp might communicate extremely slowly in plain English, I guess, since it did get recorded by the US Navy. Angel earlier says that whales aren't fun to talk to as they speak and think very slowly, and this might be linked to the Krelp being former whales who have developed some psychic droning powers, which, as I type it out and read it, is ridiculous. But like, man, we're already talking about sea monsters. Them having low-level psychic droning as a mutant evolution of whale song is actually kind of cool. Of course, the message, "the birds are working," was recorded long before the flock ever showed up. It seems like the Krelp was sending that message, but what did it mean then? Like, I'm gonna go out and throw away the idea that the Krelp might be, like, fully psychic and able to see the future. This seems like the only solution that makes sense, okay? Maybe the Krelp were literally being helped by the seabirds earlier, who were helping them, like, point out the fishing boats to attack, but that doesn't explain why the second half of the message about the birds are working to help us is seemingly in reaction to Max and specifically about the flock. It's either the same message but in two different contexts, or one message that has been said long before it was completed with the second half. So if you have Krelp theories, like, tell me. I'm all about Krelp life now, and I'd love to hear people's thoughts on these horrible, suffering psychic pain tubes. My new best friends. So the Krelp know where Mr. Chu is, and thus where Dr. Martinez is being held. And with their help, Max and Angel go to rescue them. Mr. Chu has a secret underground dome protected by a vast electric field, but the Krelp ram right through. They use their body ooze to melt the glass dome and collapse it, and Max swims in to grab Dr. Martinez, who is definitely getting the bends. And then the Krelp create an industrial-strength ooze bubble for them to travel in back to the sub, pushing them along as they go. After the rescue, the book skips ahead, as it always does. Like, there's very rarely falling action in Maximum Ride. The epilogue offers very few answers beyond the notion that everyone's alive and okay. We don't learn any more about the Krelp or Mr. Chu's exact fate, or what's going to happen as a result of finding this illegal waste off the coast of Hawaii. The book just ends with Fang and Max kissing in the sky happily, and Total says this: gotta go, gotta go. I don't know my Total voice. Again, I always imagine him as like a grumpy New Yorker, but gotta go. Gotta go. Timmy's in the well, if you know what I mean. He, Total, winked and trotted off with Aquila, while we all tried very hard not to think too much about his last statement. Chapter 76. I haven't felt the need to put a ton of quotes in this long review video thing. Like, generally, I feel like there's very little I need to illustrate that I can't explain more succinctly by speaking. But I sure do keep putting in Total being weird quotes, and that won't stop. Not until someone stops him. Hi. Hello. This is my hair again. I don't know what it's because of the, like, yellow at the tips that I haven't trimmed out that it looks really weird on camera to me. Oh, okay. It's fine. Whatever. Anyways. Before I get into this next section, so this just arrived at my house and this is the Krelp to me now. And I think that I'm gonna do this next section with my new best friend. He's so nice. Sorry, I collect fancy stuffed animals, designer stuffed animals and such. I have so many cool stuffed animals in my house, I say, pointing at some, holding up another. Anyways, I'm just gonna hold him while I do this next section, and we're all gonna accept that, okay? We're gonna accept him. We're gonna pretend he's the Krelp. So, there's a trend that a lot of people have forgotten about, and it's the time when every single YA series was having a manga-style adaptation. Maximum Ride included, and Maximum Ride very much. Whereas Hush Hush and, like, Beautiful Creatures only had 1 volume, Maximum Ride's manga lasted 9 volumes and adapted up to halfway through Max, a Maximum Ride novel. Each volume of the manga covers half a book, and it's, like, pretty good. Honestly, Max Ride is something that's always been really episodic in nature. So the chapters and images over a text style of comic, like, it suits it very well. The manga is a straight adaptation that alters very little, and I actually like it. I mean, it's not perfect, because its source isn't perfect, but the art is nice, and the writing is faithful. Like, I might still have several volumes of it at my parents' house if my mother hasn't donated it by now. And while the books are missing from my local library, the main series is missing, they have most of the manga still at my library. The only thing that I have to comment about with the manga is Nudge. My poor girl Nudge. I mean, always shafted by the series as the least important flock member, the manga draws her in a specific way that I do want to talk about, okay? And we're gonna just sort of mix some screen grabs as we talk here, I guess. So, the thing with Nudge is drawing dark-skinned characters with much paler lips is a design choice you can see in a number of mangas, actually. But it rings us off to a Western audience because of the parallel it can easily draw to racist caricatures of black people. There's a big difference between, like, the gollywog and how Nudge is drawn, but it's hard not to feel a bit weird about this constant design choice, especially since Nudge is also drawn like a teenage girl when she's actually 11. 11-year-olds can look like teens, since that's the cusp of puberty for many girls. Like, that's just sort of is true, and I'd be remiss, though, if I didn't think it notable that Nudge is drawn with the body of an older teen, especially since it's a racist stereotype to sexualize and treat black girls as older than they are. Nudge has been the victim of this throughout the series in general. Her physical description is by far the least consistent out of any of the flock. Her hair is usually described as being in ringlets, but sometimes it's very curly or even straight, and her skin varies from a full spectrum of food adjective colors. Her race sometimes is hinted at to be mixed race, but other times she's explicitly black. And her skin tone ranges again from a kind of deep brown to just tan. And yeah, it's really one of those things that isn't a problem until it is. Like, again, yes, an 11 to 12-year-old girl can look more like a tween. She can be into fashion and boys. That's all really quite normal. But when we start to look at it broader and from the context of her being one of the few definite people of color, her appearance being inconsistent but seemingly sexualized, it seems more in line with stereotypes of young black girls rather than just being how Nudge is. And Nudge really is the character given the least importance of the flock beyond Total, so it stands out even more. I've done my own personal ranking of the flock, right off the top of my head. Nudge is actually my favorite, probably because I am a sucker for characters who are just so shafted by their book narratives and just not given anything. So honestly, it's like Nudge, Iggy, Max, I want to say next. Fang is ranking pretty low. Honestly, after Max, Angel, Gazzy, is Fang at the bottom? Fang's probably at the bottom, and then the secret extra character who's gonna come up next is at the very, very bottom. I have to point it out. So anyways, the manga is overall pretty good. It's probably worth reading more than Maximum Ride the series is. And it thankfully stops before the series is complete, about halfway through the last book that is even a little bit good. So think about that, I guess. I'm gonna go put this man away. With the sixth book, Fang, a Maximum Ride novel, I was bracing the entire time for plot details that I knew were coming, but they never arrived. And this is because I've also read book 7, and I had no memory of book 6. And that is perhaps not that surprising as I reread it. So, Fang, a Maximum Ride novel, is about as bland as Fang himself can be. I have little against Fang specifically, but I've never really cared for him either. I hate poor communication, and he excels at it, and he's just not that interesting to me. Plus, like, next book, we'll get to those crimes later. Fang as a book is nothing in particular. Notably, like Max, it has a much slower structure and style than previous books, with far less comedy skit interjections or silliness. It might be appropriate to call Max a transitional book between these two styles, as the rest of the series is similar to how this is. It feels somewhat more grown up, with less sudden twists and more interpersonal drama. Maybe by previous critique, this would seem like a positive change, but it's just not. Fang is not a very fun book. It drags, and it annoys, and it sows seeds that I'm going to hate reaping. We start off with the flock on a volunteer mission with the CSM to Chad. They're helping distribute supplies to refugees. And I'd like to say, as I scroll casually, James Patterson, by now, James Patterson needs to stop touching anything international. This guy can't handle it, okay? First, we've had multiple ideas of China buying the flock as weapons and stereotypes there, and now we get to see Africa. Oh gee, it's not so much that he's written anything altogether offensive, but it certainly is from a very American white pop culture viewpoint of international relations. It's a bunch of random people try to shoot the flock down with machine guns from atop camels, and the only idea that we see of Chad, which might as well be Africa the country, is extreme poverty and HIV. And it's not like it is wrong to say that those are problems in Chad, sure, but this isn't my first YA book, and it's definitely not my first YA book to mention Africa like this, and only from the exact perspective of poverty and AIDS. Do you remember Sweet Evil? I like to bring up Sweet Evil sometimes when I want to point out an insane book. So remember Sweet Evil, and how there's that like African love interest who was never once treated as a love interest because he was black. And he was a born-again Christian Nephilim who was the only character who inherited 2 deadly sins. And the 2 sins he had were rage and lust. The guy who once in the second book opened up really about his history, and all he talked about was how he wished he could return to his country to fight AIDS. Do you remember that? So, while the flock going to a refugee camp is nice and all, it feels like just another case of thinking about Africa as a third world and just nothing else. So, while at camp, Angel meets a girl and brings her to Max. Angel then cuts the girl's hand open without explanation in order to demonstrate that she has immense healing abilities. We then cut to a scene where this girl returns from her mission, apparently, to show off the skill, and it's revealed that she's a lab experiment made by Mr. Chu. This girl is not relevant after this, though, barring her very stereotypical backstory given by someone once she's left, and I'm just going to include that because I think it illustrates some points. Yes, Patrick shook his head. She used to have a father and 4 brothers. They all died in the past 2 years from either HIV or hunger or the outbreaks of civil war that keep happening. Now it's just Jean and her mother, and her mom has been diagnosed with HIV. Chapter 8. Like, according to James Patterson, it's like HIV is something you can just breathe in while you're in Africa. Angel informs the flock suddenly that Fang is going to die soon. She offers no real information besides this. She's just like, Fang's gonna die, by the way. And Max picks her up and, like, shakes her over this. But Max also concedes that Angel has never been wrong. I don't think that's true, but great. Fang death is now something the book is going to hold over our heads. And the series is going to hold over our heads. The flock meets a billionaire named Dr. Gunther Hagen, who is the one sponsoring this refugee camp. He has a huge air-conditioned tent in the middle of the camp, which is not a good sign. He introduces them to Dylan, an extremely attractive teen who will now be a menace for the rest of the series. Dylan is also a mutant bird person, but he's only 8 months old. He speaks kind of robotically and doesn't know much, but while this could be the basis for an interesting character, he was only made to be the love triangle leg, so he's just extremely boring. Max's voice informs her that Dylan was made for her to be her soulmate and perfect other half. Dylan in general feels extremely forced. It's not just that he's a forced love interest. From here on out, Dylan becomes a major character and pretty universally hated by everybody who reads these books. And a big part of that is that the flock is this cohesive family unit, and Dylan shows up. He's only there to become an annoying love interest leg, and he's so forcibly written into the story as like, it's the extra flock member. It's the 7th member of the flock. He's one of the bird kids and we all love him. And he is not. He does not fit in at any point. It only just feels like this weird forced wedge who doesn't belong in the story. At the point of Dylan's introduction, Max and Fang are officially together. I mean, they're openly kissing and cuddling. So the idea of this new soulmate is not very welcome to Max. It probably wouldn't have been either way. I hate soulmates as a sincere trope, I do, and Dylan just doesn't help with that. As much as Max luckily doesn't fall deeply in love at first sight, all the writing whenever he does anything points out how attractive he is and how perfect he is. And Max just feels a draw towards him. Dr. Gunther Hagen, who is often called Dr. God or Dr. G-H for reasons soon clear, explains his interest in evolving humanity to the next stage for the coming apocalypse. I wish that Max Ride villains would at least decide when and what this apocalypse is going to be, but like all of them, he's just sure it will be soon. So he has an interest in human experimentation to find a way to make all of humanity mutants, and he thinks that Max's flock are key leaders for this future. He asks her to work with him to promote his ideas, and she refuses. She goes to leave, but he stops her by standing in her way, flashing a syringe. It's another fake-out cliffhanger, but one of the wilder ones. He immediately injects himself with his needle, and then falls into a chair, where he begins to have a fit of sickness. Frankly, it sounds deeply awkward, like if you were leaving a room and a guy stood up and like, hey, one more second, and then he just injects himself with a deadly disease and falls through the floor to have a seizure. What would you do? I'd feel so awkward. Max doesn't know what he's doing. He's just injected himself with this illness. He starts to grow boils and rashes, but he tells Max, like, please don't leave, I'm demonstrating something, and he begins to then heal, explaining how he's invented these great healing powers. He then, as if that wasn't enough, pulls out a cleaver and cuts off part of his finger, which he then reattaches. It's deeply unsettling, and again, you have to imagine the sequence and events, I feel, as a comedy scene, because... Again, you go to leave a room, a guy stands up with a syringe, he doesn't explain anything, but he's like, hold on! He gives himself a horrible deadly disease, which he starts dying of on the floor in a disgusting manner, begging you not to leave. He starts to heal, and once he's fully healed, he then immediately chops off his finger to do it again. That's so strange. Anyways, Dr. God is weird, and I am going to call him Dr. God from here on out. The book calls him a variety of names. He's pretty often called Haagen-Dazs as well. But yeah, we're going to go with Dr. God for the sake of just clearness and convenience. Max leaves Dr. God and tells the flock they probably should get out of here. She sees that night Mr. Chu leading a bunch of refugees into a small first aid tent where they disappear and never return. She's sure, correctly, that Mr. Chu and Dr. God are collaborating to experiment on the refugees. She even refers to it as Nazi scary, which is the first and only use of the word Nazi in the series. And while some people, like Jean, whatever her name is, might be success stories, probably a lot of them are dying in the process of, you know, inventing this crazy medicine. So the flock came here to help, even if it was more raising awareness and a bit of volunteering. But they rather uncharacteristically leave. The book just skips after the decision, and they don't reflect on it again. The flock caring mostly about self-preservation makes sense, but for someone like Max who wants to save the world, or for the kids who all suffered from experimentation, it's very odd they don't seek to inform anyone about what's happening or stop it. They barely investigate it. Like, yeah, they were all definitely in danger there, but so were hundreds of refugees who have even less ways to fight it. As much as I think it's fitting for the flock to flee, the utter lack of care is so out of character. They've done a lot of standing and fighting against slim odds for people before, but they don't blink about these refugees being left in the care of an insane Nazi. They just go home, because they have a home now. The CSM built them one nearly, like, right nearby where they first had their first home in the first book. So there's sort of a soft reset for the series now where they just go home and again live this casual life in the Colorado wilderness. They just kick it for a while. Max randomly decides that the flock needs to be more educated and assigns them schoolwork, which everyone hates. They also dislike how much time Max and Fang spend together, as they seem to be prioritizing each other. Angel hands them a disc that Dr. God gave her, where Dr. God asks again for her to consider working with him, promising he can grow Iggy new working eyes. This isn't something that comes up again. Max starts seeing an eraser in her reflection again, something from the second book that also led nowhere and will lead nowhere. Jeb shows up at their house. Max and him immediately have a huge fight. A lot of the book here is trying to set up for the next big plot event by getting everyone to hate Max. And mostly, it makes it so that the reader hates everyone in the book. They all suck, and there's so much less, like, levity in Fang, and way more petty squabbles of misery. Jeb has brought with him Dylan, also, as he says that Dr. God and him know each other, and it'd be great for Dylan to learn from other bird kids. Max's voice continues to press the idea that Max should actually be with Dylan, not Fang. Specifically, the argument is that Fang and Max are too alike and too focused on each other, while Dylan is designed to be a perfect match and a balance. Fang is meant to go off and lead his own flock, and all of the current flock is meant to do that one day as well. Dylan, for his part, though, he fits in fine. Again, he just feels awkwardly out of place, but, like, he doesn't really do anything or understand anything. And though he has an instinctive built-in drive to be near and with Max, otherwise he's really, really not notable. I could get through most of this book without having to mention him. Like, he just doesn't factor in. Max and Fang research in private Dr. Godmore, using Nudge's computer powers to find secret documents about his experiments. Lots of cancer and agony, basically, plus many pictures of horrific human experimentation and suffering. This is all stuff that they could, like, print out and mail, but they don't. They don't do anything about it. While Max and Fang are getting groceries one day, the rest of the flock is attacked by erasers. Yes, the erasers all died in book 3, but they're back for this one random fight, and then they will not come back after that. Even though the flock has been split up for short bursts of, like, getting groceries a ton, the flock is super pissed when Max and Fang arrive late. Angel especially has been honing in on the idea that she should be in charge, as she's the most special, and she leads the notion that that Max specifically needs to leave the flock as leader, and in general. Again, this feels super out of character. Maybe not for Angel, who's really going on her, like, evil, dangerous psychic child arc right now, but for everybody else. The flock is a close-knit family and always have been, and it doesn't feel at all, like, sincerely earned that they turn on Max and vote her out. Everyone but Fang agrees to this, and then Max just leaves. She just goes. She's kicked out of the flock. It's so out of character, like... Fang soon comes to join her, splitting the flock into two again, with Angel as the new leader of the majority of them. Max and Fang go to Vegas and just goof around, while Angel plans to go to Hollywood and goof around. Despite saying this, it isn't as fun as even last book. Despite the series' like honed art of having comedy scene interjections that further nothing, Fang feels about as dour as the character it's named after. Fang and Max go to a casino and gamble, and Max suddenly gets a jackpot of 3 wolf heads, and then she hears Dr. God behind her. But it's all just like a fake out or a hallucination or something, who knows. Then they go to Cirque du Soleil, where Max is grabbed by a performer apparently working for Dr. God to kill her at Cirque du Soleil. But she just like flies away and that's it. Then they call Nudge, who informs them of Angel's plan, and that's all Max and Fang get up to. Meanwhile, Angel has decided the flock should go to a charity event in Hollywood and get, like, proper agents. She refers to having her own inner voice like Max, which informed her about Fang's death and has guided her actions. Before they leave, though, the flock is unknowingly poisoned by Dr. God with a mutation virus. In Hollywood, they all start to feel ill, but think nothing of it. Then, at a pre-concert party, they begin to get extremely unwell, breaking out in boils and rashes. Max and Fang burst in as some bad guys of some sort are circling the flock with guns. Angel grabs a gun and points it at Max, using her as leverage to then force the attackers to leave. Though Angel uses her mind control to tell them not to shoot the flock and just go home, one of the bad guys does just randomly shoot Jeb because he isn't part of the flock. Also, Jeb's there. I didn't mention that. Jeb's there, he gets shot, whatever. Once the attackers are gone, Jeb and the sick flock members are rushed to the hospital. Jeb is fine, and he explains that Dr. God has seemingly dosed the kids with an experimental drug to force them to evolve more and faster. Once it passes through them, it'll be okay, but they can't be cured, and it cannot be stopped. The flock then recovers and returns home, but immediately realizes Angel has gone missing. Also, of course, though it might not need to be said, this mutation virus Dr. God has dosed most of the flock with never comes back again. In fact, I'm slightly sure, nobody develops a new power for the rest of the series. It is entirely irrelevant. Angel has left a note about her departure, explaining that she trusts Dr. God and his ideas, and doesn't want to get followed as she goes to join him. She ends it by reminding everybody that Fang is due to die soon, and that hanging out with him, like with the flock, might put them all in danger. Max flies to Dr. God's house, which they find on Google, and finds Angel chilling on a beach chair, absolutely fine. So she then flies back and just reports that Angel's okay. Dylan talks to Fang about the note and the idea of Fang being around and how that might put everyone in danger. Dylan still doesn't stand out as having any real personality or interesting tidbits to him, but it has become pretty clear that he has a huge interest in Max and almost obsession with being around her and her well-being. He can't help it, as it appears programmed in for him to think of Max as a soulmate, but it's not an appealing character trait. Bothered by the idea that he might put the flock in danger, Fang leaves a note that he's going to investigate what's going on alone. Yet there's a lot of notes and poor communication in this book, so you can understand why I'll find it just all extra annoying. Fang flies over to Dr. God's house, and apparently, tries to go and get answers, but is immediately shot by a tranquilizer dart and captured. Dr. God says he's developed a new serum to help mutate humans into better humans, and he's curious what will happen if he gives it to Fang. He says it'll help Fang mutate faster and stronger, basically what happened to the rest of the flock, but different. Fang immediately has a poor reaction and starts to die. Angel sees this and is horrified by the notion that Fang is dying and Dr. God to do this. She's very inconsistent, and as much as, in a better work, I could chalk up her trust of him to her being literally 7, Angel is a mind reader who this book has been wheeling and dealing like someone way older. She hardly acts like a child anymore, so her naivete, whatever the heck, it's not very plausible. Plus, she's psychic. We never get full details of how her psychic powers work, but she never mentions reading Dr. God's mind. Surely she should have known he was an untrustworthy, mad scientist from his thoughts. Maybe if Max and Fang had just told the flock about all they discovered about him, this wouldn't have happened. So the explanation for her actions in this book is 2 paragraphs of a rare internal Angel POV, and simply put, her voice, as it were, told Fang, it told her that Fang was gonna die soon. And the voice told her that the best way for everyone to survive was having 2 flocks and split up. She felt having Max and Fang in the same flock was overkill, and that Dylan could just replace Fang and be with Max, while Fang stayed with her. This is Angel's logic for her actions in this book, and it is obeying the voice, her voice, which is, again, never explained who that is and what that is. It's all a poor plan, and it doesn't feel like much of an excuse. Honestly, it just feels like flimsy writing, and there may be a reason for that. Angel sends Max a long-distance psychic distress call, and she flies over to the rescue. Max and the flock then fight Dr. God and his guards, including Mr. Chu. Fang is dying on a bed at the same time. Inexplicably in the fight, Iggy pulls off Mr. Chu's head, revealing a small green lizard boy named Robert. This is not expanded upon at all. It is not mentioned again. Who the fuck is Robert? The Wikipedia page on Maximum Ride states Robert was Mr. Chu the whole time, but I do not buy this. Still, we will never learn about Robert the Lizard Boy. Who the fuck is Robert? Anyways, Fang dies or whatever, but Max just grabs a needle of adrenaline, helpfully labeled dangerous, and jabs it into his heart, so he comes back to life. The flock then restrains Dr. God to a gurney. Dylan picks up a needle and confronts Dr. God about how Dylan is realizing he's a person and not an experiment, and Dylan seems ready to kill him. Max tells Dylan not to kill Dr. God, and Dylan looks at Max, Fang, and Dr. God before injecting himself instead in an apparent suicide attempt. I mean, technically the book just ends there, but as we move on, there's 2 epilogues. Dylan injecting himself and then the end. That's how the book goes. But we then do quickly learn that he was fine, and it's not addressed any further for being such a dark incident. The epilogue, the first one, is a long fake out about Max and Fang getting married. It is so heavily hinted at, from Max wearing white, to everyone telling her how lovely she looks, to her nerves, to her bouquet, to her walking down the aisle with Fang, before they then step to either side and Total and Aquila arrive. It's their wedding. Total is barely in this book, by the way, but it appears to be a retcon that he now can talk dog language, and his Aquila relationship thing, it's healthy, but, like, I know better, okay? After the wedding, Max finds a mysterious note from Fang. In this one, he talks about how much he loves her, but that he has to go. He says maybe he was putting the flock in danger, which we know was wrong, and that maybe the flock should split up for survival reasons, a notion that is based on nothing. He says that, like, when he and Max are together, they're too into each other, and that's bad. Basically, Fang leaves and he has no good reason. It's just drama. He talks a lot about how much he loves her, but that he just has to go. He plainly doesn't have to go, but he does, asking not to be sought out, and that in like 20 years, if they're both still alive, he'd like to meet up with her, and they'll be together. The book ends there. It's not a very good ending for a not very good book. Fang came out in 2011, Fang, a Maximum Ride novel, came out in 2011, and I almost wonder if the surge of, like, moody teen dramas about paranormal creatures had some influence on how moody this book is. Instead of japes, we have conflicts that feel out of character, and instead of character development, we have character decisions that are pretty universally seen as poor. Fang is sort of weary, trying to be mature, but approaching that from the entirely wrong angle. Like, I need to know more about the Krelp and Robert the Lizard Boy, not pages of romance drama and a love story so artificial, part of it is literally made in a lab to force a love triangle. But the next book is one that I remember pretty well because it was the last one that I ever read. And oh boy, you know, oh boy. It's my soul leaving my body. Angel isn't actually that important to the 7th book. Angel, a Maximum Ride novel. The course from the last book has been set, and Angel follows it steadily. The plot is slower, and the romance love triangle continues to take center stage, even though nobody wants it to. At this point, Maximum Ride is not very fun to read. There's no non sequiturs really in this book. There's barely anything weird or inexplicable in, like, the hokey way of the first trilogy. Yeah, it kind of delivers a cohesive plot structure, sort of, but if the price we pay for having a plot is having no likable characters or fun storylines, I'd rather stick to nonsense. Fang is gone, and Max is moping about it. In the several weeks since the last book, Dylan has changed from a passive experiment learning to be human into a full-on menace. He spars and teases Max for her emotions, and he pins and kisses her without her consent. She's annoyed with him, but he won't leave her alone, as he even explains. "Never, Max," Dylan said. "I'm programmed to imprint on you. You know it. I can't fight the urge to be with you, no matter what." Chapter 4. I've discussed soulmates before. I understand the romantic notion of it and appeal. Someone perfect for you, some, like, destined thing. Like, people can like that if they want. Dylan is a bad soulmate, though, and sums up my dislike of the concept pretty well. He has no free will or even really desire to have free will about this soulmate thing. Max doesn't love him yet. As his suicide attempt last book illustrates, he can't even imagine life without a girl he isn't even dating. It's creepy, but it's especially deeply unhealthy. It's not explored, really, how toxic Dylan is. Like, it's not his fault, sure, but he sure isn't fighting it either. I think it's far more romantic and bold to fight fate, to pick who you love no matter what has been decided for you. But Dylan is this happy stalker. He's dependent on Max's tolerance of him to even want to live. And, pretty famously, a lot of his behavior in general, in the abstract here, like, it's common toxic behavior. If we haven't ourselves, most of us know a story about someone putting their mental health fully in someone else's hands, with tactics like suicide baiting. Max and Dylan can't have a healthy relationship if Max knows that if she ever wanted to break up, he might harm himself. That it is her potential responsibility to give Dylan attention, or he'll harm himself in her name. Obviously, in real life, and even for Dylan, it isn't necessarily the person doing this behavior's fault. It can be pretty complicated, but it is their responsibility. It's generally the result of someone with extreme mental illness who hasn't had the support needed, becoming very codependent on someone else for their happiness. But it isn't exactly cool for the person on the other end either. And it very much can be a direct abuse tactic, a knowing manipulation of, you know, forcing somebody into a relationship that doesn't want to be by making them feel like they owe attention in order to keep this other person alive. It's such a really toxic, really bad thing. And yeah, no, Dylan just does that exactly, and that's what Dylan is, and that's why he sucks so much. So basically, Dylan raises so many red flags, I can't even consider him a contendable love interest. Plus, he's a jerk now, and he doesn't have any personality, so there we go. The flock minus Fang are hanging out at Dr. Martinez's house when Jeb shows up, with Dr. God, who in this book is now mostly called Dr. Hands, but again, I'm going to keep calling him Dr. God for consistency. Dr. God, very apt followers of this nonsense may recall, is the kind of Nazi-implied German scientist billionaire who is performing cruel human experiments on African refugees, a plot point we aren't about to see resolved or ever brought up again. Despite that, Max seems angrier at Jeb, and only a little bit pissed about Dr. God nearly killing Fang. Dr. Martinez gets her to let them talk. Again, no one really is here, like... Dr. Martinez is like, hey Max, bring them in, let's just chat. And no one here is stopping to remember that they probably should, like, ring up Geneva. Like, no one is killing Dr. God. Like, this is a man who is unequivocally evil. Can somebody please just shoot him? Anyways, Jeb and Dr. God explain how they want Max to be the leader of the next generation of mutant kids, calling them Generation 77. Evidently, now powers and mutations are cropping up among regular kids, though all evidence in the book actually points more to scientists just abducting kids and causing it. There's no, like, people are now naturally turning into mutants. That's a lie. They want Max to go meet with the next generation at a nearby school for gifted kids, the third such school mentioned in this series. It somehow still feels like a secret that mutants exist, with so many people shocked to learn or see them, but apparently there's like thousands of them all over the place in secret schools that just have been flying under the radar this entire time. Dr. God and Jeb also explain that after the apocalypse, Max will be a great leader during the unstable years, and they think she should start having heirs soon to establish a dynasty? Like, they even have a house in Germany that she and Dylan can go to. Jeb and Dr. God have already funded a house in Germany for Dylan and Max to go to, so that she can start having heirs. Max, who is recently 15, is pretty appalled, as is her mother, Dr. Martinez. Dylan seems into it. Here's a line about Dylan. Oh my gosh, I hate Dylan. Just saying this as I, look at my quotes. I hate this guy. The worst part? When I cast a surreptitious glance at Dylan and saw the discomfort in his beautiful turquoise eyes morph into a flicker of hope. Chapter 8. Yeah, Dylan is a bit hopeful after hearing about this, because he likes the idea Max might be forced to, and they use this word, breed with him. Real cool guy. Teen heartthrob material. God, he just can't wait to go and hang out with his Nazi dad who wants him to go breed with this girl he's in love with. Real likable guy. Max doesn't want to visit the school for gifted kids, but Dr. Martinez is interested, so they all get on yet another private jet and fly over. There, Max notices translucent balloons holding up razor wire, which shreds the plane to pieces. As it's crashing, the flock scrambles to save the humans inside and gets thoroughly injured in the process. Gassy drops Jeb, but Dylan manages to catch him. Dr. God just isn't seen during this. There's a number of broken limbs all around, and Dr. Martinez calls a car to go drive them to her vet practice to go get patched up. Dylan, though, wants to stay and look for Dr. God, and Max joins him. They don't find Dr. God, but they bond, primarily over the fact that they keep having the same thoughts at the same time. This is really, like, their spark of romance, is that they keep going jinx at each other. This is meant to show how in sync they are, but wasn't the whole point of the pairing that Dylan was a complement and Fang was too similar? They investigate the school in the next morning, with Angel showing up to help, and they're shot at by children in all black. They beat up the kids and take off their hoods, revealing that these children don't have eyes, but instead a ring around their face where their eyes should be that is stuffed with hundreds of little eyes. And that's a pretty cool, creepy detail. The kids seem brainwashed, and they all talk about a coming end. They leave, but on the way out, they do find a kid wandering alone in the desert. They fly down to help, and they recognize him as, inexplicably, the homeless kid from the first book who accused Max of hacking his computer with her glitchy brain chip in the tunnels of New York. Remember him? They quiz him on what he's doing, and he talks about a coming end of humanity and joining up with the future. Max and her friends then just leave him to go die alone in the desert. He is never brought up again. When they reach Dr. Martinez's house, everyone is a bit grumpy that Max bailed on them like that, which makes sense. Her going with Dylan rather than stay with her injured mother and flock is very out of character. Also, Max's half-sister Ella is also talking about a coming doomsday and seems to be brainwashed. Ella has been spending time with Iggy, as they both really like each other, and Iggy now seems brainwashed as well. In a few days, a group called the Doomsday Group has just sprung out of nothing from thousands of followers, all seemingly brainwashed and led by a girl named Beth, who has hypnotic powers that transfer even across television. We're not going to hear about Beth ever again. The Doomsday Group, or the DG as they're called, keep talking about something called the One Light, and how the apocalypse is coming soon to destroy humanity. They see humanity as a scourge against the earth, and the end of days as a cleanse for the environment and the world, making them a strange sort of like pseudo-religious, eco-terrorism, eco-fascist cult. Meanwhile, Fang is in California forming his own gang of supernatural, well, superpowered mutant kids, from applicants on his blog. He gathers Ratchet, who has super hearing and sight, Star, a spoiled rich girl, with super speed, Kate, a beautiful girl with super strength, Holden, a boy who can regenerate his entire body, and Maya. And Maya is Max 2 from the first trilogy. Yes, Fang is recovering from his sudden breakup that he instigated by hanging out with Max's identical twin. He takes a while to even see Maya as a different person, though, as the book points out, she's essentially equivalent to Max's twin sister. She's not a clone in personality in any way. She's a person in her own right. But it's pretty obvious Fang picked her and is spending time with her to replace Max, which isn't a cool way to treat Maya or Max. Even when he is slightly thinking about Maya as being different from Max, his thoughts are not flattering. Like, this is how he thinks of Maya. Maya wasn't as hard as Max, not quite as tough. She was different, and Fang kind of liked it. Chapter 45. Which, again, implies that Fang likes Maya because she's a softer version of Max. When he sees Maya, he still doesn't see her as Maya. He sees her as, it's Max, but she's less argumentative. She's less stubborn and hot-headed. It's Max, but she's more passive. It's all kind of a bit gross and just really ruins Fang. Fang actually justifies picking Maya for his team because he wanted a good fighter, but, like, come on. Fang's gang, and I'm going to call them the gang to differentiate them from the flock, they start noticing the Doomsday Group activities too. Most of his gang are teens who were abducted and experimented on as teens in the last few months, and they want revenge and to stop others from having the same fate. The gang then finds out that a huge rally will be taking place at Comic-Con, and Max finds out via Fang's blog about his gang and that Maya is in it, which is something she's not very pleased about. The flock follows Ella to a meeting of the DG at her school, where they witness more brainwashed kids obsessed with mutants as the next stage of evolution, who will inherit the Earth, basically. They decide they need to find a way to break the brainwashing, so they waterboard Iggy in a bathtub until he breaks free. The flock starts to wonder if Dr. Martinez is in on the DG's plots, pointing out that she was the one who got them to go to that school, which was a trap, and that she willingly was just, chatting to Jeb and Dr. God. Max hates to admit it, but agrees that they can't trust any adults. This all feels like Dr. Martinez slander to me, but okay. Ella is out on a camping trip with the DG, but they track her down and break her free of her brainwashing in a hot spring. They learn that the DG is talking about the end of the world coming in 5 days, which is an alarmingly short time frame. Fang asks Max for help, as he's realized that this DG stuff might be too big for him and his inexperienced gang. Before the flock can go and help, they find a note from Ella, who's disappeared, re-brainwashed somehow, and she says that she was meant to have wings all along. The flock decides that the Doomsday Group's threat is more pressing than just one person, and again, it feels out of character for Max. Yeah, I guess I agree, go stop the Doomsday cult, but Max literally met Ella by flying out of nowhere to save one random kid. The notion that she'd swallow her desire to protect her loved ones like this is just off. You can't always save one person and the world, but Max is the exact kind of protagonist who would try, and has tried. Instead, they just leave, and we don't get any closure on Ella in this book. The flock and the gang meet, and they don't really get along. There's a lot of drama about them not getting along, and I'm going to skip pretty much all of it. Max and Fang are annoying to each other about their feelings, and Angel starts talking like a fully grown adult offering relationship counseling. At Comic-Con, Total also says this: "I'm definitely getting Trisha Helfer's autograph." We all turned to look at him. "What?" he said. "She's hot, for a human." Chapter 40. "I don't think that dogs should be capable of recognizing the sexual attractiveness of humans. Especially not Total, who's not a dog. Please." At the Doomsday Group rally, they again witness more brainwashing. The DG isn't a very interesting cult, honestly, and I quite like cults. For all the rallies and propaganda we see, they only have one core idea and message that they just repeat, making them surprisingly bland for what they are. It's an interesting idea, just wasted as usual. You might as well just skim whenever a DG person is speaking, as the entire book they just repeat the same idea without offering greater nuance or deeper lore. It's just doomsday is coming, only some will survive. We don't even learn what the one light thing refers to. For all the talk of the one light, which will continue later on, weirdly enough, in the series, the one light is just one light. What does that mean? Is it like a Christian thing? Are they believing in some sort of godlike entity? What is the light? What is the one light? Why is there only one? Not resolved. So, the gang and the flock learn that the Doomsday Group have a headquarters in Paris, so they fly there. They find jobs volunteering in the group as they gather information about a huge rally coming up. Angel and Gazzy, meanwhile, infiltrate from the inside. They meet a man named Mark, the only adult in the group, who seems to just be a regular middle-aged man. It's left vague, but he maybe then goes on to brand Angel. I don't like that I'm left wondering if the 7-year-old was branded with a hot iron. It's a cliffhanger where Mark mentions testing loyalty and pulls out an iron, but we never circle back to it. It's pretty wild violence, and violence like this has happened on page in the series, including to young children, so I'm stumped if she was branded or not. As everyone but Angel and Gazzy are at the big rally, Angel's voice appears in Max's head, telling her to go under the plaza that the rally is being held in. There, Max, Fang, and Dylan find Angel and Gazzy tied up with a huge amount of explosive and chemical gas, enough to level Paris and pollute the world's, air and water. Which I thought these guys were anti-pollution, but okay. As everyone, they free the kids. But the bomb has 7 minutes left, and Gazzy knows explosives, so he volunteers to go and defuse it, with Angel staying to help. Fang also elects to stay and help, while Max and Dylan then return to the surface to warn the crowds. Everyone is too brainwashed to care when Max tells them about the bombs, and security goes to stop them. In the ensuing fight, Fang saves Dylan, and Maya saves Max, which I guess shows that their beefs are squashed. I haven't talked much about it because the drama is just petty and annoying, but this resolution to the conflict, it's not earned. Star, the super fast girl from Fang's gang, apparently emits a high-pitched screaming noise when she runs that undoes brainwashing. Deeply convenient. So the Doomsday Group then begins to disband and panic. Max fights Mark, the random human bad guy, and drops him from 10 feet in the air. This reveals some wires, and then there's a huge explosive, as he had a failsafe rigged up. Most of the explosions are prevented. Most of the explosives were diffused by Gazi, but apparently there were still more, causing rubble and chaos and untold civilian deaths. Fang and Gazi then emerge from the underground, but Angel doesn't. 5 hours later, Angel still hasn't returned and appears that she has died. Max notes that the Doomsday Group probably isn't over, and we're left with this unusual amount of open threads as the book ends. We're left wondering about Angel's fate, Ella's fate, Dr. God's fate, Dr. Martinez's fate, Jeb, though in an epilogue it is revealed that Angel is alive, but held captive to people who assure her that she has immense power and must recognize her coming role as a superior being. Honestly, in hindsight, Angel is not a good book, but it's not as bad as I expected. I mean, I can't really pick between it and Fang on which is worse. Both being pretty dull overall and too full of manufactured tween drama. It's ultimately that and the relationship dramas that really sour me to it, and the poor decisions. I mean, Max and Dylan kiss and grow close while in Paris, officially kind of a thing, while Fang and Maya have hints of something being a thing. Neither of them are endgame, I know, but they both represent relationships that I can only really qualify as problematic. Certainly unenjoyable. And this was the last book in the series I'd ever read. I know I read it when it came out, which was 2011, which would have made me about 14 years old. And that's actually prime age for it. But I was so disheartened that I couldn't be bothered to pick up the final book in the series to see how it ended. Like, going into the final book, I know how the series ends because I've looked it up before. But when I'm reading this now having read it, but I wrote to them as I went. So it's a very interesting experience to know spoilers and see, like, how is the series actually going to end? Because when I was first reading it, even though there was so much left open-ended, even though things like Angel maybe finally has a destiny, a fate, she's held captive to be some sort of horrible great thing, what are they going to do to Angel? I just couldn't care anymore. There was just nothing worth caring about. The flock doesn't feel like the flock, the books don't feel like the books, and I'm not surprised that I quit at this point, even though it leaves on a big cliffhanger. But no, next up is the 8th book in the series, the final book in the series, and it's going to be interesting to see if there's even a crumb of what made it good in the first place left by the end. And also, I hope the Krelps show up again. Because I hope they're doing okay. Because I really miss them. And I hope they're okay. In 2015, long after Maximum Ride was hot, Marvel adapted it. Marvel! The flock is canon to the extended Marvel universe now. Like, they were there in Endgame if you squinted. I mean, the talking flying dog probably fits in with like 18 other Marvel characters who fit that exact same bill. Like, they belong there. I missed the comic entirely, as it seemed to be released again without any buzz, just like the movie. It still somehow lasted 15 issues, long enough to fully adapt the first trilogy of books. But the thing is that the Marvel comic is not very good. I've seen the first book at this point adapted a number of times, and Marvel's take is much shorter than the rest. These are comic book issues. They're very, very short, very condensed, and pretty rushed, because that's how that's just the world of comics. So there's not really any room in the adaptation to make it feel like it has any identity before it just ends. In general, the story and the designs are inconsistent. For example, Ari has 3 eyes at the start of the series, and then later on he just has 2. And the whole thing just feels frantic and crammed together. Part of this slapped together feeling for the Marvel comic is that it was actually worked on by different creative teams every arc, and it feels like at that point it was more of a contract being filled than like one person's passion to adapt the comic, and that lack of passion is pretty obvious. The biggest change is the flock. Instead of wings, the flock have grafted robot wings, a choice that instantly robs them of their core identity. Like, it's wings either ways, but the flock being partially birds is a huge facet of their identities. It's more than wings, it's the way that they are a flock, specifically, rather than a family, and their natural inclination to just want to be free in the sky. It feels like making the wings just implants changes a lot more than the logic of how they're able to hide the wings so well. Rather than mutants, they're just people who have robot parts, and anyone can do that and be that at that point. The flock was engineered through genetic tampering in utero, and that's a really different origin. Beyond that, the Marvel comic has that sort of art style that's gritty, a bit ugly, and mostly just uninteresting. There's very little to talk about in terms of anyone's designs, except for the fact that they all towards the end get like special bulletproof combat suits, so they look more like generic superheroes. The comic doesn't even have the bravery to keep Gazzy's reason for being named the Gas Man, you know, because he like farts. And it's now just all about explosives, because they're just absolute cowards who think that that's too silly or something. The one thing I will note is that I really like the cover art of the first series. The first issue of the first series is a nice cover. Everything else just isn't worth checking out, in my opinion. Like, the manga literally already exists and is a far superior adaptation. Well, the Marvel comic wants to be its own thing, but it just doesn't come up with any new ideas that make it worth checking out.
Holy Jesus. What is that? What the f*** is that?
Okay. My body kills me every time I do one of these. I mean, I know that I'm recording for an insanely long time, which is a long video, but like, Jesus Christ. I feel quite unwell. Okay. Let's go. Let's go. My voice, it's good. I can speak cleanly. Okay. I knew how this book ended, but it was actually astonishing to see it in real time. Nevermore, proudly billed the last Maximum Ride adventure, is a book that boggles the mind. It feels like its existence is an unsolved mystery. Like, how did we get here? What the hell just happened? Why isn't it a Maximum Ride novel? Firstly, Nevermore is notably written differently. I suspect that Max Ride was ghostwritten starting around book 5, but Nevermore has a different style of prose that suggests someone else was responsible for it. It actually, surprisingly, has 1 or 2 bits of prose I liked. Max Ride is typically efficiently written. It skips a lot of descriptions in favor of speed and dialogue. So by prose here, I mean sort of poetic language. And yeah, I can tell that it's written by someone else because for once there's poetic language in this series. The thing is, even if I liked a line or 2 of the more emotional beats, this switch in style stands out. This is book 8, the final book in the series. A bit of consistency would be nice. Nevermore opens in inconsistent amount of time later. Probably months, but at one point seemingly a year later. Actually, strictly speaking, it begins after the end of the world, with Angel gazing upon a broken earth and fearing this vision of Max dying. This scene of Angel does not actually happen at any point in the book, despite being a flash forward. Anyways, back to the present. We have very little information about what has happened since last book, with the flock yet again attending a normal school. Why? Because Dylan wants to, I guess. Despite Nudge begging to go to school a number of times in the series, Dylan asks and the flock is off. Good for them. The high school is a location utilized and introduced for one real purpose, and that's making use of hot YA tropes of the time. Max is deeply jealous as scantily clad girls, oh my god, with spaghetti straps, fawn over Dylan, despite Dylan only having eyes for her. High school is an excuse for Max and Dylan to date, to scorn popular kids, for Dylan to inexplicably rent a motorcycle so they can ride together. The motorcycle thing really gets to me. Like, how did he learn? And why did every book of this era have to include a boy on a motorcycle? While the school is happening, though, this idyllic and land of just YA dreams, the literal end of the world is literally happening off to the side. Just somewhere else, the end of the world is happening. But the flock is very slow to react, and, like, put a damn pin in that. Meanwhile, Fang is still with his gang. He isn't officially dating Maya, but it's this unsaid and obvious thing that they're into each other. Fang, though, still can't help but constantly compare her to Max. Max, but less tough, is basically all he thinks about this girl who is desperate for once in her life to not be seen as Max too. The gang decides to start looking into a new apocalypse group called the 99%. That name is likely familiar and would have been way more at the time that the book was published. Occupy Wall Street also went by and was started off a Tumblr called We Are the 99%. Also, I can't believe when I researched this that the 99% movement was off of a Tumblr. It's a reference to the idea that the mega-rich of America and the world are only 1% of the population, I mean less than that even, and how wide a gap between the 1% and the other 99%, the mass poverty and the excessive wealth, there increasingly has been. Nevermore came out a few years after the Occupy movement was like at its zeitgeist, but it's impossible that the authors could have missed it. It is typically called Occupy now, but at the time, the notion of the 99% was everywhere, and I certainly remember it being also called the 99%, in addition to being called Occupy or Occupy Wall Street. So its use of the 99% as a name for the doomsday cult seems like a strange choice. The 99% in Nevermore is basically a combination of the doomsday group from last book and the buy half plan from book 3. Them being a combination of two extremely different styles and notions of the apocalypse doesn't line up, but okay. The 99% believe that 99% of the population has to die, with every human doomed and only mutants still alive. So it's a mass suicide cult then, because it's led by humans. Last book, the Doomsday group felt rather vague on their goals and foundation, but the 99% is given even less character. The book never clarifies if it's brainwashing like it did before. Instead, it appears that a huge swath of the public has just gone mad with apocalypse fever or something. We only see, like, snippets about riots and TV discussions. People are protesting out of maternity wards about how humanity has to stop reproducing. They're a little bit late to the game there. People are attacking the disabled for being too weak to survive, while everywhere people are apparently listening to lectures about the merits of extinction and eugenics. I find Maximum Ride taking the name and some of the optics of the Occupy movement and making it a death cult a bit befuddling. There's a few mentions of, like, celebrity Twitter and news coverage that is clearly showing, like, parallels between the two, even though I don't believe the book is actually trying to call a movement about wealth inequality the same as the eco-fascist death cult. But it's odd they have the same name, right? All of this is a rather horrifying event the flock is utterly ambivalent about. It really doesn't come up between the boy troubles. The gang, of course, leaves to investigate, but they're stopped midway through their journey by a convoy. The convoy is led by Aerie. Yes, they dug up my boy. Or cloned him, actually. Hundreds of times, because the entire convoy is Aerie clones. They fight, but they're betrayed by Star and Kate, who are just sort of sick of being hunted. Maya and Aerie fight to the death, and Maya is brutally killed. Maya's death was always going to happen, but, like, man, that girl had a short stick. She's been so shafted by the narrative. I don't feel like she's even had enough time to justify joining my tragic YA girl shafted by the narrative club. She's been that shafted. Maya has not had any space to define herself, ironically, away from Max. It doesn't help that even as she's dying in his arms, Fang can only really see Max. I mean, in the end, Maya tells Fang that she loves him, and he says, I know. Fang then breaks up his gang to go wander America for an unclear amount of time. Rest in pieces, Fang's gang. You guys were nothing. Back in high school, Max and Dylan are surprised by having to dissect chickens in biology class, which, as you can imagine, is extremely triggering for Max. Max leaves, but Dylan has to return later to grab her books. The teacher then talks to Dylan about how Dr. God is actually still alive, and Dylan has a new mission in life. His mission is to capture and kill Fang. Apparently, Dr. God discovered some new huge secret in Fang's DNA. Because of it, Fang has to die, because it might be the end of the world. We're not privy to the secret yet. Dylan, though, learns and agrees that Fang should die, but he refuses to work with Dr. God to capture Fang to be experimented on. He thinks, I should just mercy kill Fang at this point. Meanwhile, Angel has been held captive in a lab for months of non-stop torture. Everyone else has believed that she died in Paris. The scientists who have her continue to have no clear aim or goal with her, and we never learn if they were doing anything in particular to her. At one point, they make her watch a video of the failed operation on Iggy's eyes that rendered him blind, and then they assure her that they've improved in the last decade before operating on her. Angel is then blinded. They also clip her wings. Jeb shows up to talk to Angel, rambling about Eri for no reason in particular. He explains how he's been trying to clone Eri since he died in the third book with the help of Dr. God. He cries as he talks about how much he just wanted another chance with Ari. But he also notes, with Dr. God's help, he made Ari bigger and better than ever before, and that the failed clones make for a good army. Yeah, you know, because my old son was so weak and pathetic. My 3-year-old boy. Gonna make him bigger and stronger. I mean, Jeb here is meant to just be a mad scientist, but I found myself quite annoyed by the twist. As much as I hate the guy, he hasn't really been a character since the main trilogy ended, where it was established that he was basically just an asshole with good intentions. And also an abusive father, of course, there's no excusing that. Jeb worked with the school to make the flock, and fake save them and fake dying all as part of some grand planned experiment. Apparently so Max could stop his boss's plans for the apocalypse. The sudden reveal that he's now a thorough, just villain, unable to examine the logic of making hundreds of monster clones of his son, feels really cheap. Probably because his logic is so strange. He failed his son when Eri was 3, but his attempts to fix that are to continuously clone Eraser Ari and make him stronger. Dude, if you can clone him, make a baby. Just raise the baby. You want a second chance of your son, raise your son again. Stop making giant wolfmen to be your son. You can't... The logic here is meant to be that there is no logic. At this point, Jeb is just insane, and I'm stupid for questioning it. It's dumb of me to question why he would act so rational. But that's just a cheap plot device, and no one can stop me from questioning it and disliking the decision, okay? Jeb also explains that the 99% is all about killing Fang. A spoiler, it isn't, and this makes no sense as a statement. As usual. How many times will I have to say that before the end of this video? The entire flock suddenly hears the voice giving various instructions. Fang is told that he needs to be with Max. Max is told she has to harden her heart. Nudge is told to document everything. Iggy and Gazzy have to share a command, and they're told to protect Max. Dylan is told he needs to win Max's heart. The voice also says that the world is about to change. The flock, though, barely reacts to this. It's still YA romance shenanigans. Still. Despite kissing in the last book and being into each other, Max and Dylan's relationship hasn't progressed in the last month, still being undefined. Dylan then makes Max a treehouse in secret, since he knows how much she loves treehouses, something which has never been mentioned in 8 books. Max and him kiss, but then she accidentally knocks over a candle and burns it down. Again, this is happening immediately post a voice saying the apocalypse is gonna happen, now. We just move on from that. Who cares? It's time for kissing. Fang makes his way back to the flock, setting tension between Dylan and Max. Fang then gets an email from his blog where someone says that their dad works at a secret lab and attaches a photo of Angel's body. deeply convenient. Everyone flies down to Colorado to look for her. They find a lab which suddenly explodes, and searching around they find an immense amount of dead bodies, including a lot of scientists who have obviously committed mass ritualistic suicide. Mark, the random middle-aged man who showed up last book as a villain, who still has no backstory or explanation, is there. He is manic and deeply wounded and says that a contagion has been unleashed and the apocalypse is here. Then he commits suicide. The plot of this book is really dark, huh? All that petty teen drama keeps being contrasted with such grim visions of utter madness and death. In some ways, I wonder if maybe this was a goodbye to Maximum Ride formed out of some sort of bitterness. They find Angel in a secret basement, barely alive, and save her. She recovers in their house as Max and Fang reconnect, reestablishing their status as endgame couple. Dylan sees them being close in the woods, not even kissing, and he flies into a rampage. And this is kind of a long excerpt, but I sure am gonna read it. Bam! He brought his feet down hard on the roof of a car that was driving toward town, making a huge dent. Bam! 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 3 more cars suffered the same fate. Dylan felt a rush of thrill and fear. This was the best he'd felt since Fang had come back. On the next car, Dylan dropped down even lower. Snap! One quick kick took off the side mirror right off. Crash! A rear windshield was smashed to smithereens. It was an incredible feeling of power, a power he'd never felt before. He rose a bit and banked sideways, dramatically, hearing car horns honking, people shouting. He wheeled around the store on the corner, then swooped down and grabbed the store's banner with one hand, ripping it from where it had hung across the sidewalk. It landed on a car driving underneath it, causing the driver to lose control and crash into a telephone pole. But Dylan was already halfway down the street, ripping street signs from posts and hurling them like frisbees. Over and over, he dropped down suddenly, kicking over a mailbox, a trash can, a trellis, but the pain in his chest was returning. He reached up and ripped the electrical wires strung across the street from their pipes. Sparks shot everywhere as the live wires fell to the ground, igniting the bulging trash bags that lined the curve. Chapter 58. Man, Dylan is the worst. This guy sucks. This guy sucks so much. I'm just gonna go ahead and assume he killed at least one person by throwing a hissy fit over Max having free will. Later, when Max learns of this on the news, she actually feels bad, saying that the damage he caused was probably proportional to the amount of hurt in his heart, essentially blaming herself for his shitty reaction. Dylan, as said, keeps filling the role of an emotionally abusive man who puts Max's attention on him as hostage to his life and his ability to not do bad things. Like, just, what a schmuck, right? And yes, this romance drama stuff is happening post the news a deadly pathogen has been released onto the world. The flock just doesn't seem to comprehend the idea that maybe somebody should do something. Like, maybe them? Maybe? Could someone also please, like, arrest or kill that, like, Nazi Dr. God guy? Also, could someone please do that? Dylan decides that since Max isn't dating him, he probably will kill Fang after all, thinking it's for the greater good and that maybe Max will just later forgive him. Jeb shows up at the flock's house with a pack of his sons. He explains that Fang has to die, and why. Fang's DNA is indestructible and holds the secret of immortality. Fang is not immortal, but in theory could be used to learn how to create immortality. He's the missing link. Jeb then explains that if everyone was immortal, overpopulation would be a huge issue, so the 99% plan has to happen so that isn't a thing. And Fang has to die. As people may realize, this doesn't logically parse. I don't know enough about DNA to say if it being indestructible could transfer to inventing immortality, but it certainly seems a bit much to kill all of humanity just in case. Obviously, the school, or ITEX, or Dr. God, or whatever, has been trying to kill all humanity so mutants can rule for a long time, despite the fact all of them are humans. But Jeb implies that Fang's special DNA is the reason the 99% is acting now. Essentially, the panic in the scientific community of immortality maybe being invented soon is why scientists have released a super plague to wipe out humanity. If you have a deadly plague and want to kill humanity, why wait for Fang at all? Why wait for, you know, immortality as a threat to do it if you're so determined? Why make the 99% movement cult thing? Like, the apparent end goal of science in this world, all science in this world, is the eco-fascist notion that humanity is a plague on the earth where the only solution is eugenics and genocide. Not really that cool. I should probably briefly explain ecofascism, which is a weird sentence for a Maximum Ride video. It's not quite the best term, but I don't know a better one. The villains in this series have a very confusing philosophy, but overall, they ultimately believe humanity needs to be strong and evolved, specifically because of man-made climate change. They express this mostly through ableism and eugenics. In later books like Nevermore, the focus is especially on the concept of humans as a scourge or parasite that has to die in order to save the Earth, or at least a significant portion. It definitely can be unusual when you first hear of it to associate fascism and the Green Movement, but everything can overlap if you're a very determined extremist. Ecofascism, generally, is very concerned with overpopulation, and uses the saving the planet excuse for more fascist ideas such as ceasing immigration, extreme loyalty to one's nation and homeland, and the death of so-called undesirables in society like migrants, minorities, and the disabled. Maximum Ride obviously avoids the heavier fascist ideas, but you can understand why I feel like it is an appropriate term for what's going on. While I'm also here, briefly, I feel like I should say that humanity is not a parasite or a plague. Humanity is humanity. Like, we're here. We're here already, and we're not going to go away suddenly. The environment needs protection and care, and humans have, and still, live perfectly in harmony with it in every way. There are so many humans, and most humans live with nature. We're not causing a horrible plague upon the world by existing. We're okay. Humans are fine. The thing is that the problems we have and the issues of climate change and pollution are pretty concisely not a collective sin so much as the end result of an era of consumption and capitalism. Like, it's all capitalism, guys. We as individuals can live greener, but the main pollutants and the main polluters, the main ones holding society back, are not the people, it's the companies who have a vested interest in archaic technologies like coal, or loosening environmental protection through lobbying or pushing products that make plastic waste because it's cheaper rather than being careful. It's all about short-term profit rather than long-term solutions. This is all information we've kind of known for a very long time, too. Maximum Ride at times seems to know it too, that it's bigger systems that are the issue. But even in the final book, the flock seems helpless and ambivalent. The world is ending, and we aren't pretending it was anything but completely inevitable, even in the series about kids saving the world. Anyway, apparently Dr. God found out Fang might create immortality and told everyone in the scientific community. So now everyone knows the secret and wants to capture or kill Fang for themselves. Jeb and his army of sons don't want to kill Fang, they feel like they have to. The flock fights the Ari army. Dylan arrives to help, but after beating back the Aries, he starts choking Fang out too. Max has to beg for his life, and then Dylan flies away. Dr. Martinez shows up at their house. Angel warns that she saw Dr. Martinez with Jeb when she was captured, but Dr. Martinez claims that Jeb had brainwashed her somehow. Angel checks her mind and determines this is true. Angel sometimes gets POVs, but only in the first book did she ever seem to use her mind powers in the POV. If she can just read people's thoughts and affirm their allegiance, well, Angel, that would have been quite nice a long time ago. Dr. Martinez explains that the 99%'s plan has begun and that she's come to take the flock somewhere safe. Despite all of the books being about how Max has to save the world, they do. They just leave. Also, Ella is there. Last book, Ella disappeared to try and get wings from the Doomsday Group, but that's been retconned and changed, and she's fine now, so cool. The flock is flown to a tropical island paradise to await the end of days. The dogs are also there, by the way. Total just really hasn't been included much lately. It's almost like the series is embarrassed to have a flying, talking dog. The island is owned by someone I really have not spoken about at all, and that's because he's never actually shown up in person. So this guy is Nino Pierpont. He is the richest man in the world, and he's the flock's sponsor since book 4. Yeah, which raises a lot of questions. He's the one who funded their new houses and the CSM and all those private jet journeys. He's basically just a cheat code of a man. He's there to explain funding with a wave of the hand. But there is something kind of off about the multi-billionaire, richest man ever, funding all of this from the sidelines. It's a pretty common and truthful phrase that, like, one can't become a billionaire without exploiting someone. The amount of gross wealth is so intangibly high, humans can barely understand what a billion is. Like, it's nice that Nino Pierpont is funding efforts to raise awareness of climate change and help the flock, but actually, shouldn't he maybe be doing more? Well, apparently, he has been doing one thing more, and that's making a tropical island apocalypse shelter. The place the flock arrives in is full of mutant kids like themselves in a huge paradise park, where each flock member has their own custom tree house, and below the surface is a state-of-the-art bunker meant to survive anything. It even apparently has a force field, which, those aren't real, guys, but this one has one. The only humans on the island are Dr. Martinez, Ella, and Nino Pierpont, making it his first actual in-person appearance. The flock enjoys their new home, which seems utterly perfect, not blinking much at the coming doomsday they keep being reminded of. At this point, it's been days, weeks, since they learned about a virus being unleashed, and there's been no mention about it, about how it's going out there. Dr. Martinez explains the virus that was released was an edited version of the avian flu that the flock is immune to because of their DNA that's mixed between humans and birds. So this virus will only kill humans. Of course, it surely would kill all other mutants if it is just the avian mix that is protecting them, but that's just another wrench. And Dr. Martinez goes on to explain that the virus, which is called the Finisher, mutates and mimics other viruses, and it's impossible to create a vaccine against, even with the foreknowledge that both she and Pierpont had. If this virus is that mutatable, that it can't be prevented at all, if it evolves and mutates that rapidly, it's probably gonna be able to evolve to the point that it also affects animal life and mutants. Like, that's just a fact. It's gonna kill everything in the world if it's really that unstoppable. The notion of viruses that mutate so quickly that we can't have a proper vaccine against is a thing. Like, what do you think the flu is? The flu is a bunch of different viruses that are all similar. We can't properly fully vaccinate it. We can't stop it. But you still can get a flu shot because there are ways to build up immunity or resistance to them. So very rarely is it a case of just, here's a virus that we literally can do zero about in any way. But apparently that's what the lab has released, and Pierpont and Dr. Martinez have done nothing about it. I mean, Max actually points out that if Nino Pierpont and others had known about this virus for that long, like before she was born, and had the time to make all these bunkers and prepare, they surely should have had time to do something. And that might be the only and best commentary Max Ride has ever offered. I mean, it leaves Pierpont speechless besides the claim that the vaccine is impossible. Because, yeah, a lot of people have known for a long time what was going to happen to the Earth, and only the super rich have been able to independently really prepare for it. That's true in real life. Millionaire doomsday preppers are very much a thing, and all of it raises the question of, well, why are there so many people who would rather prepare and survive the apocalypse than actually stop it? But Maximum Ride doesn't examine the thought any deeper than that. Max and Fang enjoy paradise some more. Dylan shows up suddenly, saying something huge in the sky that he's had this vision of. Everyone looks up and it's like, there's nothing in the sky. And he keeps insisting, I've seen something huge, everyone has to flee into the bunkers now. Max quizzes him on this, and despite knowing and having heard Dylan is capable of seeing into the future, doesn't believe him. Dylan falsely says that he's never lied to Max. And I think at this point, it's the author forgetting he already has lied in this book alone, rather than that being a reflection on how much he sucks. Angel then shows up, and Angel says to Max that she's seen visions of the apocalypse, and Max should trust Dylan. But despite knowing Angel has also had visions of the future, Max doesn't really believe her. Dylan leaves to go ring the alarms and get everyone into the bunker, and Max is just in denial. Max continues to argue, eventually deciding randomly that if this is really the apocalypse, she should go fly to the mainland and die. Literally. Here's a quote. "I'm tired of running from the unknown. If the threat is real, I'm gonna face it, whatever it is, with the rest of the world." And then Fang decides to join Max on this. He says, "We'll fly back and face the 99%, he said, nodding at me. "But it's not them!" Angel shrieked from the ledge. "Aren't you listening? All the preparation Dr. Martinez and Pierpont and Jem and all the other whitecoats did, poking and testing us and shooting us up with God knows what to make us immune, it was all totally pointless. It's not coming from the 99%. It's coming from the sky." Fang shrugged. "Then we'll face the thing in the sky. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." He gave my hand a squeeze, and tears streamed down my face. "You'll die here," Angel cried. "You'll both die, falling, just like I saw." I looked down at her, not sure how to explain myself. "Angel, I was supposed to save the world," I said quietly. I paused for a moment, realizing the gravity of this statement, and then stood up straighter, suddenly more sure of myself than I'd ever been. "I was supposed to save the whole world, not just the special ones, not just the ones who have the protection of some multi-billionaire. So if the rest of the world has to die, I have to go down with them." Chapter 82. Yeah, so beloved tween book hero Max Ride decides to go off and kill herself. This is why I again wonder if spite was involved in this book. Somewhere. The decision to have her hero just utterly give up, fly back to die in the end of days, is just comically dark and out of place. After a book of teen drama and not caring about the apocalypse, Max suddenly cares so much she wants to go die for humanity's sins or something. She doesn't even think of the rest of the flock, who, by the way, do not appear in the rest of the book. The flock has felt less and less like a family, despite that being part of the core idea. And in the end, the fierce leader and guardian of them is going to go die with her boyfriend. Angel stops them from flying by suddenly exclaiming that she is the voice, and she has been the voice the entire time. This is treated by the book as true, not a lie by Angel to make them stay, but it's worth stating that it makes no sense. Angel is not the voice, even though she explains with multiple examples from the series that she's been the voice the entire time. Most of the time, multiple times the voice has spoken to Max about things Angel does not know or failed to inform her of things Angel did know. The voice sounds nothing like Angel, speaking more like Jeb, who it originally was. The voice has also given Max advice contrary to what Angel has wanted. If Angel was the voice, don't you think that, maybe before they rescued her, Angel might have used it to tell Max she was still alive? As Max is reeling from this information, the sky suddenly explodes. Yeah, they wasted enough time that the apocalypse happened. It's a bit vague what has happened, the sky appears torn in two, and the description almost sounds supernatural, these two flaming halves of a growing empty gash splitting in the middle. They fly towards the shelters but are stopped by a sudden loud bang and a wave of extreme heat. They are then hit by a mega tsunami. The book then fakes that Max has died, with a full epilogue where she speaks directly to the reader as if she's dead, but somehow is delivered the book to us through time. She tells the reader to act now and save the world, but doesn't even admit that she totally failed. I know that the girl couldn't stop a random meteor, but come on. This is a series vaguely about Max having to save the world, and at the very end she utterly fails. All of humanity is wiped out, and she's taken no direct action in this book beyond kissing boys. In the second epilogue, Dylan saves Max and Fang, and them plus Angel observe the ruins of the island. They sort of come around to thinking the new post-apocalyptic world was made for them after all, and they almost appear hopeful about the new world. Ideas that entirely defy the purpose of the full series and what Max told us. Apparently, everyone in the world dying horrifically to a mix of a massive meteor and deadly pathogen that rots skin off your bones is a good thing after all. Max sure seems happy. There's no mention of the rest of the flock, though Angel can tap into Dr. Martinez's head to say that the rest of the world has been similarly devastated by natural disasters. So we can presume everyone in the world is dead. Max gazes this into the sky. She just looks away into the sunset, basically, and she says this as the final words of the book. No joke. It is my time. The time of maximum ride. See what I mean about the bitterness of this ending, though? Like, just the strangeness? It feels like Nevermore is some act of protest against the series itself and the direction it was heading in. Teen drama, over hijinks, over fun, over saving the world. So the world just burned without them. The end. Everyone is dead. Screw you for thinking the world could be saved, you idiot. We're probably better off now, doing exactly what those eco-fascist scientists always wanted. In the end, even Max seems to agree. She accepts her fate entirely rather than fights it. She's going to lead the next generation of evolved humans after all. Like, I guess the villains won when you think of it that way. Just everything's over, the world's a mess, here we are, and man, I hope the Krelp are doing okay. I do worry about them sometimes. Maximum Ride is something, huh? Thanks for coming along on the, ride. It sure took off flying and then it dove right downhill, right? But in a pretty fascinating way. I mean, watching it unfold, I never really noticed how inconsistent the differences between the trilogy and Book 4 was, or how separate Book 5 to 8 was. I mean, the Antarctica plotline really was just a fever dream. Maximum Ride compels me because it was good, and it so easily could have been good. If at Book 4, J-Pat had just, sketched out a new villain with a new scheme that could be covered in 3 books full of silly detours and crazy twists, it would have been beloved whether or not it had been cohesive. I mean, especially in hindsight, the sloppiness of the first trilogy plot-wise feels like a comfortable rhythm of nonsense compared to the slog of later books. Sure, we'll never know why that Ouija board was sending Max a message in the toy store once, or why she kept thinking she was turning into an eraser, but those drop threads are far more enjoyable than, Dylan and the retcons and the literal end of the world and also Dylan. When I first went to start reading this, I couldn't find any Maximum Ride books in my local library besides the manga. And for someone who's constantly circling 10 used bookstores in my city, I'd never seen a physical copy there either. And that's really odd because Max Ride was a veritable bestseller by an author who only makes bestsellers. Maximum Ride was a huge, huge hit that died a slow death that it didn't deserve. I mean, one so preventable. I keep thinking about how I'd do a book series about mutant lab kids and how fun it'd be. What went wrong? I really do keep thinking to myself, man, I wonder how hard James Patterson would come after me if I just wrote a book about a bunch of wacky mutant kids, because I have a lot of really great ideas, guys. I think I could do it. But still, at the end of it, I'm just glad to be done with it. 8 books is a lot, and I'm sorry I've been slow getting through them. I mean, a month really isn't that bad to cover 8 books, and I shouldn't be hard on myself. Anyways, I'm gonna go on break now and we'll see what the next project is, but thanks again, everyone, and I'm just so gonna walk out now, and don't look and notice there's actually more time in this video to cover stuff. I'm definitely stay tuned, but also it's definitely the real end of the video. Anyways, bye. Sorry. I forgot something. So, there's actually 3 more Maximum Ride books. Nevermore, which says clearly on it, it is the final Maximum Ride book, not novel, which ends with the protagonist passively watching the world end, is not the final book. 3 years later, after Nevermore was released in 2015, maybe because of very poor reception, Maximum Ride Forever was released. The final Maximum Ride book. And then, in 2020 and 2021, a sequel series called Hawk was released. Hawk is about Max's eventual teen daughter, and I'm not going to read it now, but I might if there's enough interest. But yes, Maximum Ride Forever is a thing. It's a book fully post-apocalyptic. Oh boy. Do you know of a famous fanfic called Fallout Equestria? It's extremely famous in the My Little Pony fandom, and honestly far beyond, and imagines the world of the hit video game series Fallout, populated by the cute cartoon horses of My Little Pony. I'm not here to draw broad comparisons, I have no interest in ever reading it, but it comes to mind as I discuss Maximum Ride Forever. The secret, extra, actual final book released 3 years later. Do you remember a long time ago the first trilogy in the series? How it was about a bunch of wacky mutant bird kids who faced evil horrors but with sass and hijinks? How there was literally a character named the Gas Man because he farted a lot, and how the end of the world seemed to be stopped by some kids protesting and like a fun few like fights? Well, Maximum Ride Forever, the resting place for the flock, is so far removed from that it feels it's hard to feel like it isn't a fanfic crossover. My beloved childhood characters soar through ash and mud and nuclear fallout, desperately searching for bugs to eat and fresh water to drink. Everyone has died, and many more will, and this book is notably far more brutal about all of it. From feral dogs tearing a flap of Nudge's face off, to Fang being torn apart by seagulls, to Max gouging out a man's eyes before he commits suicide. The gore and misery are off the charts this book, yet it never feels like it wants to be adult either. The cast is still in perpetual arrested development up till the very end, still nebulously a year older from when they began the series 9 books ago, still captivated by drama until the sluggish end. This is a strange one. Like, I think I might be right. I think that by the end, someone really, really hated Maximum Ride. And they were the one writing this final book. Nevermore failed to resolve anything, but it did have a slightly hopeful note in the end. Like, after the meteor, the flock we saw was okay, and their home seemed broken, but still kind of paradise, just new. 3 months later, we start this book, and we learn it is hell. Though the rest of the flock is there now, there's been no word from the shelter below the island, and Dr. Martinez and Ella are presumed dead. A volcano has made the area uninhabitable, but the flock still lingers. Max is holding out for survivors. During an eruption, Dylan doubles back for their clean water supply, but never returns. They find his charge shoe and accept him as dead. Right off the bat, guys. The flock finally leaves the island. While sheltering in the flooded ruins of Sydney, they witness mass graves and piles of rotting corpses from a mix of tsunami, meteor, and deadly virus. They are then attacked by gigantic, hairless, dog-like creatures dubbed Cryenas, which nearly skin Nudge and fatally wound Aquila, Total's normal dog wife. Aquila dies, and as the flock rests at a cabin to bury her, they argue about where to head. Angel insists they go to Russia for unknown reasons. Max wants to go back to the island to look for her family and survivors again. Fang has been shown by Angel a vision of his death and thinks he should head off alone. Iggy and Gazzy want to chase up a message about a shelter in America they found from a few minutes of internet. The flock, so, looks at all these different plans and then they just split up. Like, entirely split up. It's not the first time, but it feels far more final in a post-apocalyptic hellhole full of death. Everyone basically agrees to go split up and die alone, it feels like. You can understand the high emotions and tensions in the situation, but it still feels deeply wrong and stupid. Also, actually, like, before they split up, Fang lies to Max. He says that he's gonna stay with her, Nudge, and Total. Max and Fang are cemented in love, you gotta remember that, and at last, they're together. They actually have sex, but he leaves on his own in the morning. Why he feels he has to go die alone is unresolved and annoying, but it's, you know, been a previous plot point that he feels this way. His death vision isn't linked to Max in any way, nor does he even know how soon it is. He's just gotten a vague vision of his death, and he's like, time to go die alone. Meanwhile, as the flock splits, we check in on a guy named The Remedy. The Remedy lives in a huge underground city bunker and talks to someone he calls one of his horsemen. The horseman is actually named a string of letters and numbers. He's seemingly a clone with a single mission of killing the flock. The Remedy says the flock are old, failed specimens that must be killed so the next generation will be stronger. And how the Remedy, he's just a simple doctor who wants to cure the world of its ills before he too will kill himself, as everybody does in this book. Horseman, as he dubs himself, is extremely strong and determined on his mission. He's one of many horsemen, like enhanced mutant soldiers, but is called Horseman, something that might be a little bit confusing. I'll often just be calling him as like, and then Horseman did this, but also there are the horsemen. I don't know, man. Max, Nudge, and Total return to the island. For the first time, somehow in 3 months, they bump into some survivors. They are fish kids, the only survivors of the underground bunkers, which flooded during the apocalypse. Dr. Martinez and Ella are confirmed dead. Fun. The fish kids are entirely blasé about death. So as Max and co swim through an underwater tunnel to reach their bunker home, giant lampreys start swarming on them. Max fights them off with an oxygen tank that she can still breathe underwater and doesn't need, but she does fight them off and it's convenient she has it. But she does witness another fish kid not escape the giant lampreys so easily, in a really disturbing scene. His mouth opened in a silent scream, a flurry of bloody bubbles escaping from it, and the muscles in his neck tightened into cords of agony. His eyes bulged in disbelief as his legs flailed and his hands scratched and tugged at the creature desperately. The sucking mouth was burrowing into him. Aiming my oxygen tank, I opened the valve, but only a small stream of bubbles came out. I'd used up the last of the oxygen. My mouth pressed tight in shock. I saw Johnny's head go limp, his whole body becoming boneless like a rag doll's. Instinctually, I moved away from him. When I looked back a final time, more toothy mouths had latched onto Johnny's body, burrowing into his chest, thighs, and stomach until he looked like some sort of mutant octopus. 2 brilliant red ribbons of blood throated up out of his nostrils. Chapter 30. Like, yeah, huh? We learned that 6 other fish kids died in the same way on their journey, and that everyone is just numb to it happening. Like, these fish kids accept every time someone swims through that tunnel, like 5 of them die, and they're fine with that. This is so brutal and horrifying. And isn't this the book series with the silly talking winged dog who's now going through bereavement? They stay with the fish kids for a day, but after Max learns her family is dead, she wants to move on. Oh, and also the richest man in the world, Nino Pierpoint, died of dehydration after locking himself in the food vaults without any water. Max decides to go, not having much direction in mind but maybe Fang, but Nudge and Total decide to stay with the safety of the fish kids. Max flies off and witnesses the apocalypse in Africa. She meets 2 human survivors, but they attempt to cut off and eat her wings. She also meets a bad guy who works for the Remedy, who warns that she can't avoid the horsemen, and then he kills himself because she gouges out her eyes, and that's also really brutal. We then go to Nudge's POV, as she is strangled to death in the pool by Horseman, the man, and learn that Total was impaled shortly after. Fun! Yeah. Fang is flying around California when a flock of feral seagulls descend. Another horrible scene that I want to read part of. They went for the exposed parts of him first. His face, his neck, his hands, but soon dove at anything not covered by fabric. Sharp beaks tore out clumps of hair and gouged his cheeks. Fang held one hand across his eyes and tried to gain altitude, but the gulls didn't let up. On every inch of skin, exposed nerves sang in protest as the wind found fresh wounds. "I'm one of you!" Fang wanted to scream, but they were pecking at his lips, and he couldn't open his mouth. The squawking in his ears and the full-body attack made coherent thoughts impossible, and Fang kept trying to fly upwards, unsure what the gull's top altitude could be. This meant his wings were fully exposed, and with raucous cries the birds tore into his glossy black feathers. Fang felt the rawness in the spaces between them as whole rows were pecked away. Chapter 41. I mean, you gotta love beloved characters being brutally eviscerated by feral animals, it's a classic. Fang escapes, but then meets two child soldiers who mistake him for a horseman. They brag about how many survivors they've killed, and how the Remedy has instructed the One Light cult to bring, like, everyone they meet and, like, kill them. Fang fights the kids and is helped by Star, the super speed girl who betrayed him. Star explains how she was offered the opportunity to become a horseman, but escaped, and that Jeb was the one manufacturing the special serum that makes horsemen so powerful. Max, meanwhile, is looking for Fang with just, like, luck on her side. She meets a group of feral bird kids who are far more bird than human. One of them, who she dubs Harry, is extremely attached and follows her from his flock. He seems to have some intelligence and memory, but mostly acts like a young child. He recognizes Max from a newspaper clipping he saved, one actually from Book 4, one of the few acknowledgements that Book 4 ever happened. He, however, also looks like a super hot teen. She and Harry are captured by One Light cultists, led by a man pretending to be the Remedy. The imposter Remedy says he's been able to live by tricking these feral children and giving them survivors as sacrifices. And then he sends a wave of young children to go murder Max and Harry. It's another horrible claustrophobic scene where Max and Harry cower in a cage as on all sides children with knives and weapons attempt to stab and tear them to pieces. They manage to escape from the bloodthirsty crowd. Harry then kisses Max suddenly, which is extremely weird, and all it achieves is making just everyone uncomfortable. Gazzy and Iggy, meanwhile, are searching for the bunker they heard of, but they can't find it, instead stumbling upon some hostile other survivors who put them to work in their camp. Horseman arrives, and they attempt to escape, with Gazzy accidentally exploding himself in the process. Iggy flees for a long time, but is eventually caught and killed. Astute readers may notice, astute readers, astute listeners, whoever you are, you may notice that the flock is being murdered in the exact order of importance. It goes Nudge, Total, Gazzy, and now Iggy. And yes, I do believe the books place Nudge as less important than the dog. We go to Angel now, who can see and fly despite ending last book blind and with clipped wings. Angel has been flying across the world finding survivors and gathering them in Russia, at the bunker of the Remedy. How so many people are supposed to make it to Russia, many of them from America in a post-apocalyptic world, is a mystery, but I'll tell you, they do manage it. Fang is flying towards Russia himself when he spots a figure fighting erasers and goes to help. It is, somehow, Dylan. The erasers here are not Ari clones, it seems, but are now horsemen too, making them extremely powerful. Fang has seen from Angel that he'll die to erasers in the snow, but he doesn't flee from this exact scenario. Jeb is also there, because he always is, and he informs Fang that the horseman serum is made from Fang's immortal DNA, and then Fang is torn apart by erasers. Dylan goes to meet with Angel after this, informing her that Fang is dead, and it is done, before he kneels dramatically at her feet. Max then stumbles upon Dylan and Angel. She has heard from checking the internet at this point briefly that all of the flock is dead besides her. Dylan, however, explains that this isn't true. The flock is still alive. Obviously. Or, like, not that obviously. I would have said that at the first death, I would have added a caveat, like, obviously Nudge isn't dead here. But the way the book treats it, is it really that obvious that they all lived in the end? The book sure makes it sound like they were all horrendously murdered, and part of me wondered if the book might just, like, do that, like, just kill everybody off so the series could end in a blaze of despair. But, no. In truth, Horseman, who's been killing all of the flock, is Dylan. It's a pretty obvious twist. He was captured by the Remedy, who's actually Dr. God. I have been begging for the cast to kill that guy, and look what my advice could have prevented. The literal end of days. Dr. God made Dylan a horseman, but the programming into an assassin, like, just never took, so Dylan was always fully in control. He faked the flock's death under guidance of Angel. Except Fang, who really died. So the erasers were sent without Dylan's knowledge, and they tore Fang apart before he rolled off a cliff. And yes, Fang has actually died. This is not a fake out. Fang is just like, Fang straight up did die. That's just like a, hey, everyone lived, except Fang. Fuck you, Fang. The flock then regathers in Russia outside Dr. God's bunker, along with the army Angel has been collecting. The army is mostly new characters because everyone we know and love is dead, but Fang's gang is also there. Angel then gives a leader speech and uses her psychic powers to show everyone a vision of how the world ended. After, she tells Max that when she went blind, she later realized she had psychic visions. The wise person here will of course realize that Angel has had psychic visions before her eyes were experimented on in Evermore, but okay. They then go to battle. Every YA series from this era ended with a giant battle that didn't necessarily make sense and never was fun to read. Who likes reading giant battles? Besides, like, historical fantasy fans and, like, and I guess war fans, which, good for you if you're into battle fiction, military fiction, good for you. But this isn't military fiction, so the fact that every YA of this era always had, like, a big, poorly defined, uninterestingly written battle by someone who doesn't actually care about, like, military tactics is actually one of my pet peeves. Anyways, there's a big battle, and it's strange that it followed suit for Maximum Ride to end like this. A bunch of previous Maximum Ride baddies, like, put up a fight, like the M-Geeks and the Flyboys, all the old faves, as well as a brainwashed child army. Star then shows up, and she runs so fast that she starts breaking their brainwashing again. A very useful ability she should have been doing just non-stop around the globe to prevent the apocalypse. Max and Dylan then infiltrate the bunker to find Dr. God. They meet Jeb, who is fully insane now, and talks about how mutants are too human, and how the next generation will be immortal robot mutants without any humanity. Star and Kate show up and snap his neck, finally at last killing him. Max finds Dr. God, who has turned his body into a bomb in some way. Dr. God explains his evil plan. After the plague was released, which the flock utterly ignored last book, he made himself a hero by giving out vaccines. All information the flock again somehow just missed, that their nemesis was becoming a world-famous philanthropist. This led to him being put in charge of Russia's nuclear arsenal to shoot down a coming meteor, but he didn't, letting it hit the Earth. Then he set off hundreds of nuclear bombs across the world, and further made his army kill the survivors. Which is quite the plan, huh? Just, you know how when you develop, like, a vaccine, they put you in charge of the nuclear arsenal of Russia? You know how that happens? I think that happened to those guys who made the COVID vaccine, right? They're in charge of, you know, like, China's nuclear arsenal for unclear reasons now. I think that is how it works. Anyways, really implausible, ridiculous plan that relies on things not seen in the last book. Cool. Also, shooting a meteor with a nuke. I've heard of this as a concept before, but, like, really? You know, that would definitely cause nuclear fallout worldwide if it happened, because it's a nuke. You have to be really far away. You have to be shooting that nuke far out of the atmosphere to be certain that no fallout from the nuclear explosion isn't going to rain upon the Earth and cause, you know, a nuke. But okay. Dr. God talks about how Max's generation, and Max in general, was actually nothing special and has to die out, to which Max reveals she is pregnant with Fang's child. Dr. God attempts to stab her stomach with a pen, and she just drops him. He attempts to set off the bomb that he's rigged to, but it fails, having been deactivated off-page, so he falls and dies at last, a little too late. After the battle, Angel reveals nuclear winter is coming, and they all need to bunker up for several years. Dylan goes to show Max something, Fang's dead body. He secretly healed Fang up and offers to use science to bring Fang back to life. Max agrees, and Dylan kills himself with an electric jolt, which then flows into Fang and returns him from death. Oh boy. Dylan leaves a note about loving Max and being happy to make her happy with his death, basically. Oh boy. The trigger warnings for Maximum Ride are going to be off the charts, right? How is this happening? Everyone shelters for 4 years underground. Fang is fine, and Max and him have a baby girl. After nuclear winter, the flock flies to Machu Picchu and chills out, with the end of the book being Max teaching her 5-year-old, Phoenix, how to fly. And that is the actual end-ish. As said, Phoenix is the subject of a sequel series, but I decided I needed to draw a line somewhere, and I've drawn the line of doing the original Maximum Ride run, and not counting the way less read Hawk series anyways. So yes, the actual end. We can only pray that the Krelp are okay. By the end of Maximum Ride, I didn't feel like I was reading Maximum Ride. Like, I'm gonna have to go and find and replace the word weird from this document script thing, but I find it hard to fully summarize the series without that word. It's hardly the only series initially for tweens that grew increasingly dark, but while others felt like stories that had to grow with characters and a world to match that was growing and maturing with the readership, Maximum Ride was always a limited story unable to grasp the global scale that it wanted. The thing that makes it fail, I think, is that I don't believe it ever really tried. I don't know that I'd call the first trilogy in the series a work of passion and masterful storytelling, but James Patterson had an idea and he stuck with it. Sure, it was based on tiny chapters and cheap jokes and non-stop plot twists, but there was fun there. Somebody liked writing Maximum Ride at first. Somewhere around book 4, after it was all supposed to be over, success took over. It sold incredibly well and people just wanted more. Patterson is not an author who stops a series that is selling, and so Maximum Ride kept going, just rolling over without an identity. It grew to be darker and more mature, but there was no love or commitment to any of that. It felt like an obligation that it was changing, almost trying to match the times that it was in, rather than it being faithful to what the series was. And I don't know what to make of the way that it ends. 2 apocalypses and just a sense of gloom that sticks to them. I don't think for a second Patterson was still at the helm. And I don't think that him being at the helm would have made it better. But at that point, Maximum Ride truly did just feel like a spreadsheet of numbers by the end. It's still selling, and so again we go. More of the same to no particular end. Finishing it gives me at least some satisfaction that I've witnessed it. I can tell people about it like some apocalyptic storyteller, weaving a narrative long past and warning people not to go where the ancients once did. I don't feel satisfied, though. Maximum Ride Forever is more of a conclusion, but the story it's ending is not the Maximum Ride I actually care about. It just feels like an obligation that I'm freed from. At least until this video goes out and I have to talk to people non-stop in the comments about it for weeks, which I am excited for. Thanks, though, for coming to the process of my body breaking down, as it's been many hours of me filming this non-stop. And I always get extremely sick when I film long videos. So, hey, thanks for coming on this, the Maximum Ride. Thanks for coming on the Maximum Ride with me. Crowcaller on YouTube. Bye.